Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to this Youth Summit, Youth in Activism and Civic Engagement. First of all, I want to acknowledge your leadership for the planning of this summit, Jaylssa Alfred. Second, I want to welcome our newest members, Toledo and Columbus Youth Council and the Ohio University College Chapter. It is true, you are the future leaders of the NAACP. But it is also true, you are the leaders today. You are not silent partners in the NAACP. We are all one big happy family. I know all about big families because I come from a family of 10, and all voices are heard. You and I are co-leaders. Your voices are needed and need to be heard now. The game changers are extremely important to the NAACP, and so we need to hear your voices. And all of the 7 game changers is educational, criminal justice, health, whatever, civic engagement, whatever the case may be. It is all important that you participate and your voices are heard. Lerone Bennett, the founding author and editor of Jet and Ebony magazine, wrote a book in 1972, and it was called The Challenge of Blackness. And in the book, there is a poem that I've rewritten for my benefit as the Ohio Conference president of the NAACP. And here's how it goes. The challenge of the NAACP is the challenge of internalizing the newborn game changers. It is the challenge of letting our light shine. Not only because it is our light, but in the world in which we live, the light we reflect is the only light left. NAACP youth and college chapters, let your lights shine. You and I heard that in Sunday school, the first song we ever probably learned. This little light of mine, I'm going to make it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to make it shine. Let your light shine. This world, this nation, this organization needs your light. Best of luck to you on your successful summit today. And I look forward to participating as much as I can. But let me just say, God bless you and welcome to this summit.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jaylen Alfred. I'm president of this Cincinnati NAACP Youth and College Division and of the Ohio Youth and College Division, and I'm also a candidate for Cincinnati City Council. I want to thank all of you for being here on this summit. This summit is extremely important due to most of the work being done is from youth across the country. So I wanted to thank you again for being here, and I look forward to some great discussions.
Welcome everyone to the 2021 NAACP Ohio Youth Summit. I am your moderator for the first hour of today's discussion, and the topic is youth activism and civic engagement. And I have an amazing panel of young people with me, and I am going to let them introduce themselves.
Do you want to go in any particular order, or shall I start?
Let's start with you, Camille.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone that's out there watching. Hi to all my fellow panelists and Kayelin. Definitely appreciate you moderating, and congratulations on the Miss Ohio title. You wear it very well. My name
Thank
is Camille
you.
Hall. I am the co-founder. You're welcome. I'm the co-founder of the Young Black Professionals and Businesses of Springfield. I also am the owner of Lyra's Vegan Treats, which specializes in vegan desserts here in Springfield, Ohio as well. And the last thing that I'll add as far as an introduction is that I'm also the director of the Promise Zone Crew, which is a youth summer program that has a curriculum that is centered around hip hop culture. So I'm very excited to be a part of this panel today and participate in this discussion about how we can increase and sustain youth civic engagement in our communities and within our NAACP community.
Awesome. Thanks, Camille. Jaden, why don't you go next?
Of course. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Jaden Jefferson. I am a student journalist out of Toledo, Ohio. I specialize in covering politics to business news to just anything that you'll see on the news on a daily basis. I'm really happy to be here to discuss all these important issues that are extremely important to our community. You might have seen me on the Ellen DeGeneres Show, live with Kelly and Ryan, and maybe a few more as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jaden. Good morning, Dave Vosk. Thanks for being with us. Can you please introduce yourself? Dave Vosk, can you hear us? Okay, I don't know if Dave Vosk can hear us, but let us move forward with Chaz. Are you on? Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Chaz Amos. I am a community leader in the city of Dayton who is currently working on a vision to renovate and instill pride in West Dayton neighborhoods. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here, and anything that can add to the progression of young leaders, I'm down for. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here this morning.
No, that's awesome. I want to take a minute to thank all of our panelists for taking time out to come and have this very important discussion. Like Jaylin had mentioned, it's the young people that are the future of civic engagement. And it's so important that we understand what civic engagement is, what are some of the barriers to that, and what can we do to get young people more involved. So those are the three questions that we have for today. So I guess we can start with the first question. What is youth and civic engagement? So can we start with Jaylin?
Of course. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me? A little bit.
We can hear you.
Okay. So youth and civic engagement to me is change, is fighting for change and standing up for injustice. I mean, if you look at it, the most work done in this organization is by young people and fighting for civil rights, even to our Cincinnati conference that we had a few years ago, in which we felt our voice wasn't being heard. So we all banded together and we made noise. So youth and civic engagement is making noise for those things that you feel passionate about, those things that the status quo aren't willing to change, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So what do you think, since you're going into politics in this, what do you think, like, young people who are interested in making a difference in the political arena, like, what do you think that difference is in terms of engagement, like using your political power? How is politics a method to engaging young people?
So politics is a method to engaging young people because it's how we change most of these problems. You have to start from the top down. So with engaging young people, I believe politics is important because we're becoming more politically aware. You look at everything that's happened these past few years up until now, young people are getting involved in politics. So being there and having your seat at the table is how we're going to make change in the future.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's so important to engage youth in politics, especially since we understand the power of the vote and we understand how young people's voices in the political arena can make change at the policy level, right? So that's super important for people to understand, is that there's so many different ways that young people can get involved, and political participation is one of the most critical and important ways, because we understand that a lot of our struggles occur at the policy and systemic level. So thank you so much, Jaylin. Camille, what is youth and civic engagement to you?
Okay, so when I think of youth and civic engagement, as Tom was mentioning in that great introduction that he gave, is that the youth are leaders of tomorrow. But I think it's important to point out that the youth are not only the leaders of tomorrow, the youth are the leaders of today. So that's why it's so important that we continue to uplift and empower them and get them involved. When those gears are turning in their minds and they're wondering how they can be involved in the community, what organizations are available for them. I also apologize. I do have a dog, and she has a toy that she enjoys very much. So that I'm not growling in the background. Okay, so I think that it's important that we empower the youth. I think that the youth are always, they have the energy, they have the human power, and it's just like, many leaders have stated, like, there's power in people. Like, we hear that phrase when we go to marches and we're chanting it aloud. Power to people. There's power in people. There's power in groups and in numbers. So I think when I think of youth and civic engagement, I think of the present. I think of leaders. I think of a great piece of this pie that we call, this quest for forward advancement of, everyone and striving towards equality. So I think kind of less from the standpoint of youth and kids and, kind of relegating them to that space and lifting them up to be amongst everyone else. Because we think of a majority of the, key leaders that are pointed out in all of these social movements that were working to enact social change, they were young, and that says a lot. So I think that it's important that we continue to educate our youth, that they're aware of that, and also empower them and, not diminish or try to decrease the impact that they can have.
No, I think you're so right. Just instilling in young people the power that they have. I think so many times young people feel like they can't make a difference because they're young, and it's actually quite the contrary. I think you're absolutely right when you make a point as well. When we tell them they're the leaders of tomorrow, that kind of makes them think that they have time, like this is not something to worry about today, but instead teaching them that you're a leader right now and you can make a difference right now where you are. And I think that's an awesome point. And the one of the ways that we can do that is definitely educating them and uplifting them. So I think you make an excellent point. Dave Osk, hi, thank you for joining us. I'm so sorry you got kicked off earlier, but we're so glad to have you. Can you just do a brief introduction for us and then just let us know, like, what is your definition of youth and civic engagement?
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And you guys have already said some really amazing points. I'm just one of the youth pastors here in Cincinnati. One of the churches I attend is Power and Faith Ministries, Apostle Ron Banks and Pastor Geraldine Banks. And for me, youth and civic engagement is basically teaching the youth of today what a real sense of community is. I think a lot of us millennials, we kind of got fed up with things and we kind of ship out, whereas we can really truly teach them to pour into their community and to build it instead of them being unhappy and them leaving. If they can build the community, then they can be satisfied with it. I think if we give them a sense of direction, um, they'll know that they have a voice, like you guys said, that they have options and that they can really call the shots within the community. And so I think civic engagement for our youth is really just teaching them, where they truly are and what they can truly do. A lot of them aren't aware that they can feed the homeless. A lot of them are not aware that they can submit a petition. And, there's so many different things that our young Black African Americans aren't aware of, that they're capable of, to be honest. And I think that that's where some of the older youth, such as myself, we come in and we bridge the gap between, some of the older generations and the newer generations. And we really let them know the effective things that worked for us and those that came before us. So it's all about like really just truly just teaching them and empowering them and letting them know that they have a support system. We see all this racism and stuff going on and all these different forms of oppression, but there is the ability to rise above it. And I think civic engagement would teach them that they can soar. I think it's about letting them know that they can rise above everything that we face by teaching them everything that our ancestors have risen above.
Oh, that was so amazing. You're absolutely right. I think that is a very key piece in all of this is a unified front. And the way we do that is by building community and instilling community. And one of the things that I like to do with my title is to shift the thinking from charity to community. Charity is just throwing money at a cause, but building community is being active and involved and taking actionable steps, using your own gifts and your own talents to make a difference within your own power and your own sphere of influence. And so I think part of instilling civic engagement in youth is also instilling a love of community, because we understand how the world and the media tends to divide us as a community. And so us young people definitely need to understand that in order to overcome systemic oppression, we have to present as a unified front. So thank you so much, Devos. Chaz, how about you? What are your thoughts?
So I believe I don't want to. Your question was, what does youth and civic engagement look like to me, right?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, youth and civic engagement basically just looks like the generation that I'm in now, along with the millennials, and basically explaining that there's no age limit, there's no beginning age for you to be a leader in your community. And also just getting people our age to understand that civic engagement isn't just going out and planning community events. Civic engagement is going out as you're doing those community events and knocking on doors and getting the community within involved, letting them know who you are, what you're doing, and this is how you can help next time. And that's how you start a snowball effect where, you just go out and do event after event, and it's not just for the community. It's for the community with the community. So that's what youth and civic engagement on a very general scale looks like to me.
Thanks, Chaz, and you're absolutely right. I think you just kind of followed up with what we've all been saying so far, is getting the community involved and presenting a unified front. And the young people need to understand also that they are not in this alone, that they can engage other members of the community. And like Devos pointed out, bridging the gap between the older generations and the younger generations. And there's also what I like to call a leadership spectrum, whether you are working at McDonald's or you're managing a Fortune 500 company, there is a space for you and there is a spot on the leadership spectrum for you. You can be a leader within your own sphere of influence, doing whatever you do. We all have gifts, we all have talents, and we need to understand what those are and use them to make that difference. So thank you, Chaz. Jaden, how about you?
Yes, to piggyback off of what you just said, I think that is critically important that youth knows that there is a place for them. And I would say that's been something that before I got into journalism, I was like, should I really be a young Black person going into journalism? But then I realized that there are many, many, many Black people that have gone into journalism and have built successful careers around it. So, journalism industry in general, it still has to diversify. So a lot of youth are coming in and they are doing that work to make that, to change the industry, to diversify the newsrooms across the country. And it's important that there are more Black youth in our communities to elevate those Black voices, because as many of you saw during the summer, once George Floyd's death occurred by police officers in Minneapolis, I mean, a lot of news organizations started to take coverage of Black communities seriously, including myself. That was something even I overlooked. So I think it's just critically important that youth know that there's a voice for them, even in media. So they have the ability to, to go to college for journalism and pursue their passion at a local level, even a national level. So that's what I would say. Definitely let them know that they do have a voice, and it can be their local newspaper. It can be a national newspaper. They do have that voice.
Oh my gosh, you bring up such a great point, Jaden. Using the media, because we understand that the media controls the minds of the masses, and it's absolutely insane how much the media influences us. I study the brain, and it's crazy how we've learned how malleable the brain can be and how it can actually be adjusted to our experiences. And so I think you bring up a great point, is we need to begin to change the narrative. We've had so many messages presented about ourselves and our communities through so many different outlets, including the media. And I think it's so important that we get into these spaces to change the narrative about ourselves, our communities, what we're capable of. And I think youth and civic engagement is an avenue to do that. So not only getting involved within your community, but getting involved in some of these spaces where you can make actual tangible change. So with that being said, I'm opening up the floor to any comments. I don't think we've had any questions in the chat just yet, but does anybody on the panel have any responses to anything that anybody has stated so far? Anybody want to add on to the current discussion? Yes, Camille, and then Jaden.
Okay, so I just want to say that this discussion is completely awesome, and I could probably sit on here and talk for 5 hours. But something that I wanted to talk about, since we have all these amazing, bright minds on here, is we talked about the need to share community with the youth and what that means. But can we also discuss maybe the breakdown, or maybe how that varies amongst our community, since we're all representing different geographical areas within the state? What does, the state of the Black community look like where you're from? Was there a breakdown there? Do you feel like it's something strong that's ready to welcome youth leadership? I just kind of want to have that discussion, because it's kind of interesting, because we have this idea of, taking a village to raise a child and concepts like that. But what is the state of our village that we have? Like, what is it that we currently have to give to our youth and pass on to them? Anybody can take that.
You know what? That kind of leads into our next discussion as well. Our next topic of discussion, excuse me. What are the barriers to youth and civic engagement? And so I think we can just kind of dive right into that as well. This is more of a flowing conversation, it seems like. So Camille, if I am understanding you correctly, you're wanting to know what the demographic of Ohio is looking like, how it's broken down, right? And how the state of the Black community within the different communities in Ohio affect youth and civic engagement. Is that what you're asking?
Exactly. Maybe there's some hurdles that are faced. Maybe, what is currently available in your community isn't necessarily a completely solid, structure for youth that's looking to be involved. So I'm just kind of curious, since, we're all kind of in different parts of the state, how the communities look where you're from.
Yeah, does anybody have any responses to that? So Camilla's asking, how does where you're from affect the barriers that youth are facing to actually be involved?
I would say that, across the state of Ohio, for education, I would say is that we have to stop conforming to what maybe white people would want us to say or do and act. that can be the main barrier for any great discussion or any great points to be made. Because I go to a private school, and even though it's diverse, there aren't a lot of Black people, but there are a lot of white people. And the struggle can be having to have those tough discussions that may be uncomfortable. But as history has shown us, uncomfortable discussion leads to lots of change. So that's why, I don't try to conform to what other people's expectations are. I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to say what I want to say, and I'm going to say it with passion. That's what I'm going to do. So I think that's what we need to do as a community, as a collective, in order to make those necessary changes that have plagued our communities for so long.
First of all, Jaden, you give me so much life. Second of all, you're making some excellent points here. And so what I hear you saying is we need to instill some confidence in young people and teach them who they are, and to understand that regardless of the environment that they're in, that it's okay to be themselves. It's okay to be unapologetically Black. And in order to be able to do that, they need to develop this certain level of confidence within their Blackness. So we have to instill that in them and explain to them, okay, you are going to be in some spaces where you're going to be uncomfortable, but that is not a reason to change who you are. You're going to have to be bold about being Black because of the system that you're living in. So I think you make a great point, Jaden. Thank you for pointing that out. So instilling confidence in young people, regardless of where they're placed in the world or within their community, and to love themselves through all of this, performative diversity and inclusive initiatives and all these other things. It's important that they know who they are and they're confident in that. Does anybody else have any comments on that? Yes, Dave Osk?
Well, Jaden, you just came with all kind of boldness, so I commend you on that one. So clearly there's power to the young Black people, all right? One of the things that I realized that we really have to do is embrace our young people. To be honest, the youth of Cincinnati, Ohio, they're super duper standoffish, and it's just their generation. So they have a different perspective, they have a different background, and what we can't do is leave them where they are. We can't be afraid to embrace them. Um, I know we talk about a lot of like police brutality and things like that. One of the ways that I try to engage with the youth here is by confiscating guns. It's a huge thing here in Cincinnati. Like, you can easily find a 13-year-old with more guns than a police officer. And I know it's because of their background and they feel like they need to protect themselves, or maybe that's all they see. But at the same time, we can't just look at them as, little bitty terrorists with guns and just leave them right there. Teach them why it's inappropriate to have a gun. Teach them the dangers behind it, and embrace them until they can make that change, or if they ever even make that change. There's different things that we expect out of people, but we have to meet them where they are. And I think we as a Black community have taken on the perception of other people, so to speak. And we misjudge our kids, and I feel so bad about it, because if anybody should be able to embrace Black children, it should be Black people. And so for us to look at them and call them hood rats and hoodlums and thugs and all of this stuff, like, what about the ability to, to say encouraging words to them? What about the ability to hug them when they need it the most? Like, a lot of these kids are doing things based off of the emotions that they have. So we have to really get in the trenches, um, meet them where they are, and dig really, really, really deeply to get to some of the root causes of the things that they have going on. It's super unfair for us as a Black community to just disgrace our children the way that we do. And so my plight is that we learn to communicate the way that they communicate, that we learn to embrace them the way that they need it versus the way that we feel like they should have it. So sometimes our perception can give us a one-track way of doing things. But just like when you're a parent, when you're raising kids, it's not a one-size-fit-all method. You have to make adjustments, you have to calibrate. So I think when we talk about this, you just really have to figure out what your demographic is, what they're dealing with, and how you can adjust and be a support system for them and embrace them. Because change happens with time. And a lot of the times we kind of feel like things need to happen like right now. But when you have children that are like 16 years old, they have 16 years worth of whatever oppression they've been in, whatever drug habits they've been in. So we have to meet people where they are and take that necessary delicate time to build them up.
Right. So I hear you saying that some of our barriers are bad habits within our own community that we need to address, and the way that we treat young people and our lack of understanding of what they're going through, it could be a barrier as to why they're not getting involved. And that makes sense, right? Like, we expect them to get involved and do all these things and be these certain type of people that we know they can be, but we're not taking the time to get to know them, their struggle, and how, as generations change, how oppression manifests itself in different ways to keep them from reaching their full potential. Like before, racism and systemic oppression were so much more overt and more visible, and now it's slightly more insidious, and it's a lot more invisible to those who are bliss to our struggle. So I think you're absolutely right. We as a Black community need to come together and embrace our young people if we have any expectations of them getting involved. And I think that's the responsibility of all of us, not just if you have children, but if you have the ability to mentor or go out and make a difference, to embrace the people within your community to make that change. So I think we all have a responsibility to make that happen. Thank you. Chaz, I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, so I was listening to what Dave Oscar was saying, and it's crazy because I'm hit with this line a lot of times. I was just hit with it yesterday. People tell me, Chaz, you give me so much hope for our future. And of course I take it in, but it just really makes me think, like, why does it take for me, someone who had a mentor, someone who was blessed with a support system, to give you hope? Just as someone came along with me and mentored me and kept me under their wing, that's what our community needs to do. So it's more than just saying that, oh, well, there's no hope for our future. These young kids, I hear so many older folks they've completely given up on our generation. And we're like, what? It's just like, regardless of how bad we get, regardless of how many guns we're toting, regardless of how many, I hate to say it, but how many babies we're having, we're still people at the end of the day, and we're still young African Americans who already have odds stacked against them. So when it comes to the Black community, our own community, not having hope in us, it kind of leaves us with a double.
Oh no, we lost Chaz. Okay, hopefully he comes back, but he was making some great points. What I love about this discussion is that it's centered around what we can do as people. We're not talking about other people. We're not relying on any other communities. We're having a discussion on what we can do within our power to make a difference. And I think that is so great. So many times we are talking about, oh, the white man is doing this to us or this. And I love that we are focusing in on our power and what we can do. So I think this is great. Jaylin, do you have any final comments on this?
I think everybody hit the nail on the head. I don't think there's much I can add after that, besides the point Chaz was making. That's time to elevate our youth. That's all I can really add to it.
No, I think that's so important. I think everybody made some excellent points, from uplifting the youth to understanding the demographic that you're living in, to using your power within whichever space you are in, to embracing young people. I think all of these things address some of the barriers that young people are facing. So that leads into our final question. We are already almost out of time, right? And so we only have about 15 minutes left of this discussion. And so the final question is, what are some solutions? We discussed the barriers and we discussed some things that we can do, but what are some tangible things, some actionable things that we can do? And everybody may have a different opinion on this based off of, their specialty and what they do. So I would appreciate if everybody could give an example of something actionable that someone can do to help increase youth and civic engagement. We can start with anybody.
I would just say that we cannot be fearful of confrontation. Confrontation may be viewed in a negative light, and that is for good reason. There are times when being confrontational can give you negative results, but I've learned from interviewing lots of people who play a role in society and have major influence that confrontation can be a really great thing. Over in summer of 2020, I spoke with a lot of law enforcement officials about what they're doing to ensure that Black people aren't being policed differently than others. And when I confronted them with those facts, those statistics, I started to get additional answers. So if you don't want these answers that aren't going to give you any different information that you already have, then you have to confront them. You have to say, look, this is what I want, this is what I have seen, and this is what I'm tired of. So when you do that, you will see changes. They may not be immediate. They may take a few months. They may take a few weeks. They may take a few days, but they will happen because you acknowledged the struggles that you're dealing with and that your fellow humans are dealing with.
Yes, Jaden, I love that. So what I hear you saying is start by recognizing our fellow man as human beings, right? I think that is one of the issues that perpetuates our oppression, is that a lot of our problems are rooted in the fact that we are not seen as full-blown human beings. If you keep humanity at the forefront of this, I believe you wouldn't care so much about what somebody looks like or how much money that they're making, or assign any type of value to the level of material success that they're attaining. And so keeping humanity at the beginning and at the root of all of this can definitely, I think, be a solution to how we see young people and their potential. And then, gosh, I heard you say something else. I'm trying to think about what my point was going to be. You know what? Hold that thought. I'm going to try to remember. Does anybody else have any additional comments to this? Yes, Devos?
Oh, well,
Oh,
Camille,
wait.
she can
I'm
go
sorry,
first.
Devos. Camille had raised
She
her
can go
hand first. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Camille.
Okay, first off, Jaden, we need to pass around a collection plate the way that you are speaking, because listen, I was, trying to dial it back a little bit, but then Jaden was like, nah, the establishment. Okay, anyways, so I feel like one of the best ways that we can increase youth civic engagement is in activism is by leading by example. So we have to be the positive example for them, to show them the way. We have to show them perseverance. We have to show them commitment. We have to show them discipline, so then they can, take on that baton and keep things going. Jaden had made a fabulous point, basically stating that, we change is not always swift. This is an ongoing race that we are running. And Tupac has a great quote. And when he was speaking to his music and trying to explain how he hopes that his music is having an influence on the people, and how he knows that he might not change the world, but he might influence the mind that does. And I feel like that is a mindset that we all have to have when, fighting this battle, fighting for, forward advancement of the community and equality, because that's really what it's all about. We also talked about instilling a sense of pride. And a lot of times it gets a little cloudy when, we're talking with the rest of our fellow human beings about why there is Black this and Black that. Why are there historically Black colleges? Why are there, young Black professional organizations? Because in their minds it can seem divisive, and it can seem like we're intentionally trying to separate ourselves. But that's where education comes in. And when you're a leader, you're also a lifetime student. So if people are claiming themselves to be leaders, then they need to continue to always seek education. And it's okay to have a change of mindset after you have received and become privy to more education. and more history. So I just implore everyone, young and old, to continue to seek the truth, the true history, because when you understand the true history of America, then you can better understand the Black plight, and you can better understand why there is the NAACP, why there were, the Black Panther Party, why there were all of these things. You cannot just feed into, what the main media says, or as we see, these movies and things being made and these holidays for these historical figures now being celebrated. But when you understand the history, we're celebrating them, after their death. So in their mind, while they were alive, they were considered a tremendous threat. So you have to keep that in mind, that when you are choosing to stand on the side of what is right, it may not always be viewed as that, and you have to be prepared to have some pushback, but we just have to remain steadfast to this and remain committed and lead by example.
Thank you so much, Camille. And guys, I remember my point, so I'm going to go back to it because it was important. Jaden had talked about being confrontational, and we all know John Lewis, rest in peace. He said that into good trouble, right? So I think you're absolutely right, Jaden, when we talk about fear. I think we have to shift the mindset from being afraid to doing what's right. And that's what leads me into my point with Camille and telling the history is we can't be afraid of our history. We can't be afraid to admit that we were in this position, but we came out so resilient, and we have to understand how much we contribute to the forward movement of this world and restore our power within that understanding. And the only way to do that is to learn your history, is to understand your history, and to not shy away from it, to embrace who you are, to embrace what we've been through. Like, yes, this is my history and it's not beautiful, but as being one of the only Black people to ever represent the state of Ohio at a national level, I am also Black history. So it's not always this horrible, it's not always this horrible, ugly thing. It's what we make it out to be, right? So we can choose to look at it as our people were treated this way. Yes, they were, but look at how much we've accomplished despite all of those things. America wouldn't be America without our contributions. And I think young people need to understand that is you have so much power, right? Like, you make this country, whether somebody is there in representation or not. You have to be confident and understand who you are. And when we talk about tangible ways to make change, talking with people who have overcome these things. We have so many people who are making change and doing amazing things within their communities. And so it's important we talk to them, learn our history, learn about how great we are through that. Jaden, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just adding that to a certain extent, it isn't our job to educate other people on our history. They have to do that research themselves to come to these conclusions, because Black people weren't just put on the earth to educate everybody else about their past. That's research they have to do, and they have to take the time to listen to Black people when they're speaking, because you're not going to learn anything if you're doing more talking than the listening. So that's what I think is important, is that when Black people are talking, your immediate response shouldn't be, well, what about this? What about that? Just listen, ingest all of that information, and ask questions later on, because you're not going to go anywhere without that. Just as you would in a school environment, you got to do that in the real world. You have to listen and then ask questions later on, because there will be the time.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything to add? We have some questions in the chat, guys. Oh, yes, Devos. I'm so sorry. Please,
okay.
go ahead.
First and foremost, could I just say, is anybody else getting Roland Martin 2.0 vibes from Jaden right now? Because he is giving it to us.
Give it to us, Jaden. Give it to us.
We're definitely gonna see him more often. I guess one of my things was, like, I've been, like, incredibly mentored by so many different people. So I think that we can take whatever influence or God-given talents that we have and just engage and just have a starting point. Don't be afraid to step out and reach somebody, because that person may be able to go and reach somebody else. Just like I think Camilla has said. We all have the ability to use effective communication. We all have the ability to persuade someone. So I think if you can just impact at least one person, that person can impact someone else. So just don't be afraid to step out and mentor someone. It doesn't matter your age or background or anything like that, because God has given us all purpose and a sense of community. And I think we should just take that leap of faith and just invest in somebody. You know what I mean? So don't be afraid or bound by how other people perceive you. Maybe you're too young or whatever the case is, but anybody can be an influencer when they have the right tools. I'm sorry.
I don't know. Is Kayelin frozen to anyone else? I just want to add, if while we're waiting for Kayelin to come back, is that that was a great point. Is that we do have to take someone under our wing, and mentorship is so very important when dealing with a youth. And I think another part of that is also being patient. You know, we talked about some of the hurdles per se that we face when trying to engage the youth in our community. And I think that we all just kind of have to do that, you know, to ourselves. We all kind of had those hard-headed moments where, you know, we're not as, you know, we think we have all the answers and we're not as open to information. So I think, you know, as we're stating, it's we shouldn't write the youth off. We shouldn't write off a whole generation of people. And when you have that mindset of writing off generation, the youth are just a reflection of the previous generation. So if you're going to write off a generation, then you're kind of writing off yourself. You know, where did they learn this from? Why do they appear to be so lost and misguided? It's a reflection back into that village concept that we were talking about. So I just feel like that's a great point. Yes, Jaden is a Roland Martin 2.0 for sure. Like, my heart is just so overwhelmed. I think another point that I wanted to make, and hopefully Kayelin gets back on here, so I won't be step in moderator, was that it is never too early to start something. Like, for instance, in my community, there was really a constant thing is the lack of extracurricular activities for youth. Like, the youth are just craving to have like some type of center or something. So what I did is I started a program, which was the Promise Zone Crew, when I was 23 years old. And I started it with absolutely zero resources. It was completely built off of my human power and my ability to connect people. No one was getting paid. You know, it's complete community service. And I did it with good intentions, and I did it with a good heart. And here we are 5 years later, you know, it's still going. So I think it's important to not focus on, you know, necessarily the amount of support or having a whole team around you, but also, you know, just stepping out on faith and doing it anyways if you feel led to do so. And Caleb's back.
I'm so sorry, guys. I got kicked out for some reason. I feel like I missed something good. So were we talking about the things that everybody is doing within their own sphere? Camille, I heard you talking about the Promise Zone group, Promise Zone crew. So is anybody else doing anything that they feel can, I guess, engage young people? If anybody says no, I'm gonna correct you. That's
One of the
point.
things that, because it's wintertime, normally what I do is I gather as many youth as possible, and I just remind them of how fortunate they are by taking them out to give like hats, scarves, gloves, blankets, and stuff like that to the homeless, because it gets really harsh here in Cincinnati during the winter times. And then we also have like food drives and stuff like that, and I prefer the youth to be the ones to facilitate and distribute, because it reminds them of just how blessed they truly are, and that it's not always about receiving, but giving to your community comes with its own reward, because you help beautify the place that you live in. So that's like one of the very many things that we do.
Awesome. So Jaylin, I would like to know, because I feel like you have such a crucial role being president of the Youth of Ohio division. What kind of things do you guys do to help engage young people?
So with the NAACP, one of the things that we have been doing to engage young people is really bunkering down on registering them to vote. Because as we've stated during this summit, your vote is your power. And more often than not, some youth don't even know how to vote. They don't know where to go. They don't know who they want to vote for. They don't even know how to check if they're registered or not. So we've really been bunkering down on that, going to schools, signing people up. We've also started doing COVID-19 supplies, because right now the African American community is the one that's getting hit the hardest by this. We don't have the same materials as everybody else. We don't have the same attention as everybody else. And really, they're failing us, to be frank. So we've been hammering down on that as well. And then the final thing that we're working on is financial literacy, because financial literacy also equivalates to power. If you know how to understand your finances, then you know how to raise, to essentially promote generational wealth. I'm sorry, it took me a second. To get the generational wealth that, if you look at it, I'm gonna just be as bold as Jaden, that white people are teaching their kids. We aren't taught when we're younger that your credit score matters as much as it does. That um, you don't want to get a loan or all this stuff, and interest rates and all that other fun stuff. So that's really something else that we want to bunker down on as well.
Awesome. So we have a few questions in the chat that I would like to answer. We only have a few minutes left. We are going until 10, so that's great. A question from Mr. James Jefferson, who is watching. He said, this is probably for you, Jaylin. Have you noticed a change in the political climate since the inauguration, either positive or negative?
I would say yes, and it's in the positive. I think after the events of 2020 and a disastrous presidency, more politicians are paying attention to us. They're hearing us out more, and they're willing to work with us. So I would say yes, it's for the positive. Now, whether they stick to that commitment later on down the road has yet to be determined. But yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything to chime in on that really quickly before we move to the next question?
I will say, during the day, I do work at the Board of Elections for Clark County. So I actually administer elections. And just kind of from my observation is that after the inauguration, or I guess after the elections were certified, which did take some time to do, is that there was kind of a sigh of relief. I think it's important that we, of course, we can acknowledge the disastrous prior presidency, but we cannot allow that to take full responsibility for America and their history. So it's just important to note that this uptick per se in race-related violence and discrimination that was attached to that presidency preceded that, and it's deeply rooted. And just because we have a new administration does not mean that those things have just magically poof and gone away. So I think that's kind of an observation that I've made. There's definitely been some anger from those who are supportive of the other side that kind of feel like, things are slipping out of their grasp once again. But, that's why we're here, so we can all be equal, whether they like it or not.
Awesome. We have another question from Claudia Mason. And I think this might pertain to Jaden. Jaden, what role does the entertainment industry have in sending positive images and messages about our youth/community? And I can chime in on this too. We only have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to be wrapping up the discussion. But if anybody has any final comments after this, you only have a few minutes to make them. So Jaden, what are your thoughts on that? The role of media is sending positive messages and images.
I would say a lot of people, they also watch films to get information and gain additional knowledge about in the Black community. So that can become problematic if that film isn't portraying the issues accurately. So that's why I think it's important that studios begin to hire more Black writers, and we need more people that are African-American behind the scenes and in front of the camera in order to make sure that what these movies are portraying is accurate and will better inform society about the issues that the Black community faces. Because I have just noticed how many people are clueless as to these issues because they're not experiencing them themselves. So that's what I would think the entertainment industry, its influence is. It's that it's a source for people, but at the same time, it can be a problematic source if the people behind the camera aren't the ones that are going to be portrayed in front of the camera.
Oh, absolutely. And I can attest to that, being Miss Ohio and being upfront in the beauty industry and doing things such as modeling or sometimes acting, just being in front of the camera in general. There is definitely a lack of representation, but not just representation, accurate representation, and just a lack of people who understand our experiences, and just they don't fully understand how it affects us. And one of the things that I've noticed is we internalize a lot of these messages, whether people are conscious to it or subconscious to it. The messages that are presented to you are potentially influencing the way that you feel about yourselves, feel about your community, and feel about the people around you. And so I think it's important to be conscious of that fact. So when you are listening to music, when you are watching something on television, when you are even reading a book, understand that these things have influence over the way that you feel. And so it's important for you to have a very conscious and strong sense of self and confidence, so that although these messages are being played into your head, it doesn't affect your self-esteem. I understand it's difficult, but that's something that I definitely had struggled with before I won the title, was being a Black contestant competing against white girls and having to stand against traditional Eurocentric beauty standards. And I used to let it affect the way that I saw myself until I surrendered to all of that and became proud of who I am and said, whether or not you give me this crown or not, I'm still going to help out my community. So whether or not you see representation or you feel like you're being seen on the big screen or not, you have to be confident enough to go out and do what you're supposed to do and fulfill that purpose you have. So that is my final takeaway. I want to thank all of you guys so much. The next panel is going to start at 10. So thank you guys for spending time with us today and talking about this. This is definitely not the end of this discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. And I think, again, the takeaway here is we can all get involved. We all have a role to play in this. It's not just one person's responsibility or one group's responsibility. We come together as a community. And when we do that, we can make amazing things happen. So thank you all so much for joining us. And I hope you stay for the next panel. And thank you all for all of your questions and all of your comments and input today.
Thank you.
So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody who's watching. I can't tell who's watching, but your participation means so much. And we're all so grateful that you could be here to talk about this discussion and to hear our young people. I know it makes a big difference in our lives when people show up and engage with us and make it known that they're behind us. So again, I'm your Miss Ohio for America 2020. I'm going to go compete in the next phase of competition, which is the national competition in March, on March 25th. And so I hope that the entire state of Ohio is behind me. If anybody has any questions or comments or would like me to come visit or wants an appearance, then definitely hit me up.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Dr. J. Okay. Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Good.
Good. All right. Well,
Good to see everybody.
I can't see anybody, but well, I can see you all, but I can't see people who are on live. But I would like to welcome everybody to the Ohio NAACP Youth and College Division 2021 Youth Summit. The 10 a.m. session is about the whitewashing of African American history. I am the host. My name is Betty Miller. I am the co-president of the NAACP chapter at Ohio University. I am a fourth year at Ohio University studying political science, law with a minor in African American studies. So before we all get started and jump into the questions, I would like everybody to just do a brief introduction of yourself. So we can go ahead and get started with Rashida.
So my name's Rashida Beatty, and I'm pretty sure I'll put my little blurb in my name, but I'm currently a graduate student at Ohio University. I'm studying visual communication with a focus on interactive design. And yeah, I took a African American Studies class, funny enough, with Professor Jeffries. That really inspired much of what I know and much of what I feel informed to share, and much of what I chose to continue to share. So yes, I'm just blessed to be a part of the conversation.
Hi, my name is Jada Morgan. I am actually an alumna of Ohio University. I graduated in December of last year with a degree in political science and a minor in African American studies. I've taken multiple classes with Dr. Jeffries and have enjoyed them immensely. And she has, like Rashida just said, like informed a lot of what I know about this topic specifically. And I'm, like her, blessed to be here. I'm grateful to be a part of the conversation.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me, and it's good to see all of you. I am Baina Jeffries. I'm Associate Professor in the Department of African American Studies at Ohio University, and I'm also Chair of the department as of this year, and I'm happy to be here. I actually earned my degree in African and African American Studies at Michigan State University, and also my master's degree in African American and African Studies at Ohio State University. So I think I'm pretty well versed in the topic of African American history and its importance. So thank you.
I too took a class or two with Dr. Jeffrey, so we all got that amazing experience. But to get us started with the questions, so my first question for you all is, why is it important to teach the unedited version of African American history in schools? And whoever wants to start off can go ahead and start off.
Okay, I'll start. I think when I was reading these questions, the thing that popped in my mind is there seems to be almost a disconnect between what I seem to know about my history and what maybe my white counterparts seem to know about my history, and even talking to other Black people, other Black youth, it seems that we all kind of have a different understanding of how we got to where we are and how much history has played a role in our current condition. I think it's important to teach African American history specifically as early as possible, just so we don't end up in conversations where it seems like, to me, it seems the answer should be obvious. And you can, I feel like you can follow historical patterns and these trends to exactly what's happening right now. And I also think that it would kind of offset this this emphasis on nationalism that we've seen to gain, that we seem to find ourselves in with this whole "Make America Great Again" slogan. The disconnect of like, what does again mean? Because for a large population of this country, we didn't necessarily ever feel like it was great per se. So I think it would offset some of that too.
I think that you can't begin to understand American history until you understand the contributions and the role that African Americans played in that history and what we experienced in that history. And one of the things that really connected with me when I began to understand that disconnect, as Jada was talking about, is that I think American history, as we've known it, as it's been taught in schools, has a fundamental contradiction. And that contradiction is all men are created equal, but we had slavery and Black people were enslaved. So, and that's a precedent that informed every other historical decision that we see throughout US American history. And so I feel like when we get to this point, especially in this past year, as Jada said, so many people are, how did we get here? What's going on? What's happening? And it's not just our white counterparts that are feeling this way. There are also young Black youth that are like, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know the history. I don't fully know how we got here. And the context of their history might start with police brutality because that's what they first interacted with. But when you come to understand the deeper rooted history, one, I feel it gives us a chance to have more meaningful conversations where we're not starting from, let me inform you on all of these things that I already knew or that you might not have known. And two, I think it helps us better contextualize and understand something that I talk about all the time, which is the Black imagination and Black people's expansiveness and how we contribute to culture. And lastly, I feel that it is another act of violence for Black students to be in a classroom setting, high school or college level, and their history is not discussed, because in that sense, you don't see me and you don't see my contributions. And if you studied US history as a professor, white professor or Black. I've taken US history classes from Black professors, or not Black professors. This was more in high school. And we did not touch on so many things. Tulsa, Oklahoma, did not know about. Rosewood, did not know about. And so when I got to college, I was like, wow, so the injustice really cut deep. It's not just slavery. And then we had Frederick Douglass, and then that was it. You know what I mean? It wasn't this watered down version of history. So I really feel it is another act of violence against Black people if we don't discuss the full scope of our history.
So I think they've already shared a lot of great things. So I'll just add this. When I was thinking about this question, and I'm listening to what you all are saying, it's really complicated because it's not even possible to teach all of African American history with the time that we even have at the college level, and let alone in high school. So this is something that should happen, I think, throughout one's socialization and growth and development. But I think it has to happen in multiple spheres as well, not just at the college level or even in school. It has to happen in the community. It has to happen in your families. It has to happen in all different aspects of your life. And I also would add that American history is taught from a particular perspective. So even in that, we don't get a full kind of perspective when it comes to American history. We learn about certain people, certain things that they did. It's a support of a great white superiority history. It doesn't even flesh out the variations and differences within white communities, within white history itself, within American history, period. We have so many people who have contributed to that history, but we don't even delve into all of those various aspects and experiences. When it comes to African American history, even when you have people teaching it who are well-versed in the topic, who might come from African American backgrounds, but other backgrounds as well, you still have a problem, because depending on their perspective about what is valuable, that is exactly what gets taught. So you still might leave out so many things that might be important in terms of the development around history, culture, and other elements of the African American experience. So I think the best approach in terms of this is to, one, have many different environments where people can learn about American history in its fullness, right? Including Indigenous people, including African American history, including European American history, right? All of this makes up the tapestry of what we call or consider American history. And that needs to happen not just in public schools or private schools or colleges, but in all different dimensions of our lives. That's one. Two, we have to have a commitment from people that we think it's valuable. I think that's part of the problem why we don't see it broadly taught. Even at the college level, people don't see it as valuable. They don't see Black people as valuable. They don't see our contributions as valuable. And so having to change those perspectives and mindsets is a very long process. I had a conversation with a student this semester. I'm teaching African American history since 1876. And although they're watching films, they're reading, and I'm giving a lecture, the student reminded me that it's so ingrained that even when they're presented with a different perspective and other aspects of the history, it's hard to let go of the things that they've been taught over and over and over again throughout their childhood, throughout their early adulthood. And so one semester with me is not going to dislodge that, which is why it's so important that this is taught in whatever space that we have available to teach it. Spaces like this, but also other spaces. So what I'll say is that, again, and I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but you know, it's not just that it's unfiltered. It's not just that it's not inclusive, but it's missing from so many spaces that we needed to actually happen. We need to have these dialogues so that people can learn no matter what age they might be. There are people who are much older who lived in the 60s and 70s who don't even know that history, right? People who have been a part of, you know, the historical context that we many times talk about in our classes, but they don't even know that history. And then we have the problem that things are so ingrained about white superiority and Black inferiority that people resist, right, any kind of introduction to a new perspective, right, or what African Americans have actually contributed to humankind. So I'll just leave it there.
I think what all you all touched on was very insightful. Dr. J giving us that amazing history, like always. But you all touched on, like, or Dr. J touched on the idea of being valuable and picking and choosing. And I know in my philosophy of history class that I took last semester, it was really eye-opening with how I kind of looked at, you know, what is history? Because that was the overall question, is what is history? And when I first started, it was, okay, history is just facts that people bring forward. But as we got deeper into the conversation, it's like, okay, but it's people picking out these facts, picking out what is valuable, what is going to be taught, what is going to be remembered, and what's not. And so it's like, who is at the table deciding what is valuable and what is not? And that's where you get, you know, like Dr. J said, our history being left out. And I know a lot of African-American students, including me, remembered African-American history being taught in high school and middle school as slavery. Then you had civil rights. And then you had, now, you know, it's a couple of bad things that happened, but, you know, we're progressing and we're moving forward. So I would consider that, you know, picking and choosing. But what would you all consider as the unedited version? What is the unedited version of African-American history?
I'm going to be honest, in its totality, I don't know. But I do think that a start is understanding that we have never had and we currently do not live in a post-racial society. Because that was one of the biggest misconceptions that I didn't fully understand until I got to college. Not that I thought that problems had been completely eradicated, but the idea of post-racial was in high school, I had white friends. And I thought that having these friendships absolved me of, which may sound very ignorant, but I thought it absolved me of a lot of issues because I'm like, well, so-and-so, we're cool. And she seems to see me. But then as I got a little bit older and I gained a little bit more wisdom on that history, I understood what microaggressions were. I was able to put more words to things I experienced. And the only reason why I was able to put more words to things I experienced is because I began to know the history. And I know a lot of people don't want to take the time to read and understand the history or even learn or listen. But without that knowledge, I would not be able to put into context the way I interact and move through the world at this very moment. And even now, even moving into the workforce, a lot of the conversations that I've had, I'm like, wow, this was a conversation in my African American Studies class. And it might seem so trivial, and no, by no means does a semester change the views of a student, but it triggers things. You can't learn that history. You can't learn about the brutality that we've experienced. You can't learn or hear those things. If you do, to me, you lack a conscience and you lack empathy, and you cannot, I can't help you there, but you can't hear those things and understand those things and it not trigger other things in your mind, and you don't see things playing out in different spaces. So yeah, as far as understanding what's an unedited version, it's definitely not post-racial. It's definitely not that was then, this is now. It's, to me, a spectrum. It's a flow. It has an ombre effect. Everything in our history is bled into each other.
I would just like echo that point. Absolutely. I really think that it's kind of impossible to say what exactly is unedited because, as Dr. Jeffries just said, like, whoever tells history, it really depends on whoever is telling the history to know like what is important to know and what isn't important to know. But I think it is incredibly important to get as full a picture as possible. And while a semester might not be enough, I think, like Rashida just said, it does trigger like the need to know more. For me, when I was in high school, and my first like idea that something was still wrong, even though that I kind of had this understanding that like, oh, I'm in school with other white people, like I go to like the #1 school in Ohio, like we're fine. I don't have to worry about racism. But when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and just seeing the difference in reaction between the people that looked like me going to school and white people, other white students, I was like, how did we see the same thing and we have completely different understandings of what happened? But yeah, I think it's a trigger, like a semester of learning, even just the barest bit of something that you've never heard before, definitely can act as a catalyst for wanting to learn more.
I would agree, but I mean, you just talked about that white-black perceptual gap, right? Why we see things differently, see racial events, racial history, these kinds of things differently. I would say that in terms of an unedited version, what I try to do is introduce students to things that they likely have not been introduced to before. And even though students have learned about slavery, there's aspects of slavery they have not been introduced to. And even how slavery is taught, right, is going to matter in terms of what you walk away from. So if you only talk about the brutality of slavery, but you don't talk about Black agency or self-determination or the kinds of resistance, right, that was there, then you've already left out such an important aspect of African American history and culture. So again, what we decide to focus on actually really matters in terms of what people actually walk away from, and if that actually shifts their perspectives about Black people. So if you see Black people as totally just victims or victimization, or people who have been victimized, and you don't see any other aspects of their culture or their participation, then that will certainly reinforce your ideas about their inferiority and things of this nature. So I think even in the subjects that have been taught, they haven't been taught broadly enough, and they certainly haven't really picked up on some of the important factors that I think are necessary for the development of young people or all people who are interested in this history and in their growth, their own intellectual growth and development. And I'll give you another example. We may pay a lot of attention to Douglass and Harriet Tubman, but there are many other people during that time who don't get any kind of attention, like David Walker and Mariah Stewart. So those are names that people probably are not familiar with in the ways in terms of how they're familiar with Tubman or Sojourner Truth and things. So I try to focus on people that perhaps are lesser known, but just as important. It doesn't mean Douglass and Tubman and Sojourner Truth are not important. They are important, but there are so many other people that are also contributing at the time that are necessary for people to really understand the full breadth, right, and the dynamics of African American history and culture. That's just so if you don't know that and you don't see that, then you really don't come away with the understanding I think that is necessary. So an unedited version of African American history would be certainly inclusive of those voices. It would also cover, I think it was Rashida who said, the breadth, right? So again, I can't hit everything, but I try to at least tap into the breadth of that history. Right. So maybe we're talking about the Native period, which comes after Reconstruction. People don't spend a lot of time in that area. They rights, but that's a Black reformers, Black people who are organization institution builders. I mean, this is a time period where you get a massive number of African-American organizations that are founded during this time. It's when the NAACP, the Urban League, the National Association of Colored Women, and the NCNW, and other organizations during this period. But they're not talked about, but it's an important aspect of African-American history. So an unedited version, from my perspective, would try to be inclusive of the full breadth, even if you're not getting into a lot of detail, it would still demonstrate the breadth, right, of African-American history, culture, and experience. So that's what I would add to what already Jada and Rashida have already eloquently said.
I think you all, hit the hammer on the nail with your comments. And yeah, I can't really think about what I would say the unedited version was, but I would say it needs to be a version, like you all said, that kind of covers, all aspects of African history. What I've noticed is the way we teach it, we victimize, African Americans, and people start to think that the only thing African Americans are is rooted in their oppression. So when we see Black joy and Black love, it's like so foreign to people. And I think that's something that we need to do, because I never learned about the Harlem Renaissance or the Black arts movement in my in high school. Now I learned all of that when I got to college. But the second question, or the third question I have for you all is, what are the barriers to teaching African American histories in schools? So more so focused on the K through 12 institutions, but you can, speak about college as well, because I know, Donald Trump, he tried to pass the Patriot Act that kind of tried to get rid of, teaching, critical race theory and stuff like that.
I think there are a few that we do kind of have to acknowledge. I think some of history is really bloody, and it's kind of intense. Some of the things that I've learned in college, and even with Dr. J, have been kind of intense for me as an adult in college. I can only imagine how it would be intense for somebody in high school to hear about some of the things that have occurred just historically. But I also think there is, like we were saying earlier, there is this general resistance, it seems, to acknowledge Black history, as it seems that, like, nobody wants to paint America in a bad light, even though like it's just what it is, you know. And there's, I don't like things like the 1776 commission that Donald Trump was trying to put out. It seems very propaganda-ish. It seems very much to feed into this general like nationalism that he's emphasized throughout his whole candidacy and his whole presidency, by specifically leaving out like some of the most crucial aspects of African American history, of American history in general. And I don't think that's, I just don't think it's conducive to like starting conversations. Critical race theory is like, from my understanding, you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, it's relatively new. It's a relatively new study. Like scholars started asking different questions after years. Like critical race theory wasn't necessarily thought of as far as, I guess, to like the 1960s-ish, where scholars started asking different questions. So I can understand the resistance to it, I sort of, but like we've been saying this entire panel, I think it's very important to get as many perspectives on history as possible to get the fullest picture possible.
One of the barriers that first came to mind for me was this idea that we sort of make Black history, or I've heard that people feel we make Black history sort of exclusive when we talk about American history, and we don't necessarily talk about the melting pot concept. We don't necessarily delve into Asian history or Hispanic history. So I know I wasn't taught that in school. They weren't teaching Black history. They definitely weren't teaching me Asian or Hispanic or different things like that. So I think we get into a conversation of, you know, whose history is more important. But and I've had that conversation, you know, well, I don't see you taking this specific class, but I think what's important and paramount to American U.S. history is that chattel slavery was literally one of the foundations. And when we talk about indigenous people, these are the foundations to this country's history. We don't necessarily, or if correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong on the history, but when we think about the foundation of this country, I don't recall Asian history being paramount at that time. So I think that when we need to, I think it's a back and forth between whose history is more important, and we don't see that things kind of come together. And I think that is one of the biggest things that I learned when even understanding racism. I will never forget, Dr. Jeffries, when you explained racism and you explained that term and how it's used and that we misuse that word. Never in my life did that occur to me that when we think of racism and why that exists and why that word exists is because of the gays and because of the history between African Americans and white people, or the idea of chattel slavery as opposed to just slavery as it was taught to us, and why it's different from other forms of slavery we see throughout history, or the word when we say slaves versus enslaved peoples. This type of language and this type of dialogue is paramount to understanding American history. And I think that there's room for other dialogues, but I also feel like when we see, and I'm going to kind of dovetail, but it makes it full circle for me, we see a rise of crime against Asian Americans. And one of the things that I saw being discussed and one of the things I saw occurring is people went to Black people and said, well, how come you aren't speaking on this? And it kind of seems like when there's any sort of issue in America, what we like to do is go to the lowest common denominator. We like to go to the oppressed. We don't look up, we look down and say, well, you're oppressed, so you should be able to help other oppressed people. You should be able to stand in solidarity with me. And we don't get that in return, and we don't see that. We don't see a large push for our history to be taught. So I think that I have a very keep your eye on the prize mentality. I have our history is important, and me understanding how I take up space in this world involves me understanding my history. And that doesn't mean I can't advocate for other people. But once I started learning and understanding how much I didn't know about my own, it made me curious about how other people's history and cultures relate and correspond to mine. But I also see that anti-Blackness happens on a global scale. It's not just U.S. history. European history, when we study European history, we see the precedent set for the U.S. So I always thought that a strong barrier could be, you know, thinking that we're making Black history exclusive or we're making it more important. But I feel like if you don't understand our contributions and you don't understand the nuance of us as a people, that's still anti-Black to me.
Just want to add to something Rashida just said, and that is every gain made by African Americans in this country, other racial minorities have enjoyed. So all the struggles, all the sacrifices, all the progress made, everyone else has been able to take advantage of those gains, even if they weren't participants in that struggle. That's one. Two, African Americans are so inclusive, many times we exclude ourselves. So again, we have been historically inclusive to every single group, no matter if it's gender, race, ethnicity, nationalism, whatever it may be, religion. So that is inaccurate in terms of that perspective or that thinking. African Americans have paved the way for all others, and even when they haven't necessarily been able to benefit from those things. Okay, that's one. Two, I would just say in terms of the K through 12 situation and obstacles and challenges, is that it's not one thing, it's many things. So you have the individuals who are resistant. This history is not important, therefore I'm not going to teach it or engage in it. I'm not going to allow young people to engage in it, and so I'm going to resist. Then you have the next step, which is just, I would say, a institutional and systemic problem. Well, this is not going to be on the test. We have to teach to the test. Students have to pass this test, and therefore African American history is not included in it, and therefore there's no point in acknowledging it, including it, or teaching it. And then you have the lack of teacher training that even taps into this history. So you have teachers who aren't even, it's not even part of their training. What's part of their training is cultural competency, but that doesn't mean it includes Black history, Black people, the Black experience, which is extremely important to American history. It's what Jada said, it is foundational to American history. And so you have all of these different elements that actually contribute to why it is not taught in any great number or I would say to any great degree in the K through 12 system. So you have training, you have resources that are not going to be allocated to teach or to be included. You don't even necessarily have enough people willing to be able to engage with the material, nor should they necessarily, because everyone is not prepared to really answer the questions that they need to engage students in a dialogue about this history and experience. So again, it's very complicated because someone may respond to King in a very particular way that is actually not authentic to King or his legacy. So you have all of these different issues that are related to why African American history is not taught in the schools. Some of it is resistance, some of it is institutional, some of it is systemic. But you have all of those different elements as we see throughout our society. The schools are no different, right? So in that way. So we're all plagued by all of these things, the individual, the institutional, the systemic. So I would say that you have all of those challenges. Now, there are some schools that do it very well. Even when I teach, you learn American history through the lens of African American history. You learn about Lincoln, you may not learn about him in the way in which it's been pushed in traditional history classes, but you certainly learn about Lincoln, you learn about Johnson, you learn about Truman, you learn about Roosevelt, you learn about all these folks. So you learn about the New Deal, you learn about you learn about all of these things, but you learn about it through the lens of the African American experience. And that's what makes it holistic. That's what makes it, I think, even more powerful for people. So I'll just leave it there. And I hope I answered the question.
No, and I think you lead me to the next question I want to ask you all is, how do you feel about African American history? Because some schools don't teach it, but some schools do, but they make it an elective. But American history is a requirement. So how do you feel about that dynamic, that difference? Do you think it's as effective as it being an elective than it being a requirement? Because I know some people it's like if nobody wants to, if they're not willing to take in the information that's being presented, then it's kind of no point of teaching that student. But on the other hand, it's like, well, people get to pick and choose. So will American history be an elective? But I can just take African American history and that can be a substitute for that.
I think it kind of speaks to this larger idea of trying to, as if African American history is like decontextualized in the whole idea of American history. I think there's pros and cons. I think a pro is, like Dr. Jeffries just said, like some people just genuinely are not ready to answer those questions, and giving students the option to answer those questions should they feel that they're ready. Having that option available is incredibly important. Even offering the option in some schools is incredibly important because I know a ton of schools do not. But I also think there's this problem. It's kind of inherently problematic to say, well, it's not necessarily a part of American history. Like you have to take a whole separate class to get history from the African American perspective when they could really be taught at the same time.
I would add that if you taught African American history, you would learn American history. So you can offer students American history and teach it through the African American perspective, and they would have both. So again, you don't have to do either. Now, traditional history courses do not do that. They teach it through a European-centric perspective, and they leave out or marginalize the African-American contribution or even the African contribution, right? Because even European history, the African experience is integral to that history as well. But if you only teach it from a particular perspective, then you're going to leave that out. However, in African-American history courses, when you teach it from the African-American historical discipline, right, African-American history as a discipline, you actually learn European history through the lens of African-American history. You learn that diasporic perspective. So really, we could make American history the elective and make African-American history the requirement, and you would get the best of both worlds.
Yes, please.
All right, so my next question for you all, before we get into some of the Facebook Live comments or questions, what steps would you recommend to someone who wants to learn about African American history? I know for me personally, I took African American history just to a class just to try to learn about it, and then I learned so much. I was like, I'm gonna make this my minor. Because I just really wanted to learn more. Because I'm like, I can't believe, like you said, Rashida, like I thought, it kind of started with police brutality, but then as you learn, it's like every institution in America, is perpetuating systematic racism. So it's like, it was a slap in the face, but I really learned a lot, and it really changed my perspective because things started to click to me about things that were even happening in my own household from learning about African American history. And it's like this is rooted so deep that I never knew before. So what if somebody wants to learn more, where should they start?
Oh, I just realized I muted. So for me, I know that everybody might not have the opportunity to take an African American studies class. And so I was blessed to be able to, and Betty, you know this, my first school was Marvel Collins Preparatory School, which was a Black private school, and that was not flying. You were going to know your history, but I will admit, once I got to public school, there was a huge disconnect, and I forgot a lot that I was taught, which is embarrassing to admit, but full transparency. But as I got older, I think I see the importance of literature. And it can be simple. So for me, I love nonfiction, but I started with fiction. And I started with the Black imagination. And that got me to thinking outside of Black and white. Like, these are just two different things. And I started to see a spectrum of things. So authors that come to mind are Maya Angelou. I started reading Black prose, Black poetry, Zora Neale Hurston. These different people began to give me like the information. As I got older, I was able to move on to Bell Hooks, Asada, Audre Lorde, these different women who, and I study specifically African-American women. I love the narrative that they teach, and I think that they have a very good job of teaching our history in a robust way. But saying that to say, I personally think that maybe we should stay away from certain films, especially if we think of Hollywood, because that really confused what I knew about history. It really confused it because it's dressed up. These are actors. It's smoke and mirrors, and it's commodified. Even when we think about Black music, when we think about hip hop, it's commodified. So the information that I thought I had on my culture and what my culture was just became a greater part of pop culture, and it wasn't true to our experience and how things were created. I grew up, just a small example, I grew up loving hip hop. That's all I listened to, okay? And I mean, KRS-One, A Tribe Called Quest, that's all we listened to at my house. You was listening to that or jazz, or, you know, you might get some Erykah Badu and Jill Scott thrown in there. So, you know, I would listen to that, and it became an integral part of my culture. But once I understood like the pillars of hip hop and the purpose of hip hop during its conception, how it changed, the golden age of hip hop. Once I learned like different things, it gave me a greater sense of pride because I understood everything we did was calculated. We had a plan. We had our own curriculum. When you study the Black Panther Party, I didn't understand the nuance in that. I didn't understand that there was a lot of sexism at play. I also didn't understand that they had a core curriculum and values that they followed. And they were very powerful, young, and educated Black leaders. So I think that staying away from Hollywood perception is very dangerous. So as far as like the book and catalog, I mean, I don't necessarily have that to give you in its entirety. I can definitely recommend books that I've read, but I will say that I would stay away from Hollywood depictions of Black history because they are just not accurate. Also, a lot of movies, as we talked about in another panel, are played by British actors who don't necessarily even understand the full scope of our history. Or it's kind of like it becomes a bit of a minstrel show and not truth telling. So yeah, I would just stay away from that.
Ooh. A minstrel show. Oh, you snapped. You snapped. For me, I honestly, I don't really know. I already kind of mentioned that the catalyst for me, like wanting to study African American history specifically, was the murder of Trayvon Martin. And I guess I kind of started at the beginning. I took a slave narratives and free fictions class at Ohio University. So I was literally starting at the beginning from like getting Black perspectives on slavery and what it was and how it affected people. You get both the brutality of it and like, I guess you could like, through that class, I could like empathize almost with what people were going through by like reading their words and reading firsthand what they were experiencing. So I would say that's a good place to start too. Like if you need somewhere to start from the very beginning, like start asking questions about what Black people are feeling at whatever time. And it might be exhausting for some people to like share their experiences at a time, but yeah, just like ask for different perspectives because I promise you everybody has a different perspective on what's going on.
So I'll just add, I won't give you a bunch of books to read, but you know, I think reading is like the best thing you can do to learn, is to start to learn about this history. But what I will say is I agree with Rashida in terms of start with narratives. Like I like fiction too. I mean, I think, but you have to be careful about what fiction you decide to read. But I would actually start with historical fiction or narratives, like first-hand accounts of people who lived during that time. So like we read Coming of Age in Mississippi, which gives us a sense of a woman's perspective, a young girl's perspective during the civil rights, Black Power movement. Or I would read Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, or I would read Frederick Douglass's narrative, or I would read, Asada. I would read those firsthand accounts, or Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. I would read those firsthand accounts by people in that moment. I think that's because, for one thing, I like those better because they have not been influenced by what people have to say about the movement yet. They're writing in the time. So they're not writing after the fact, where now they have been basically contaminated by what people have said about it, or have had, they're what other people are perceiving about the movement. No, they're living at the time, they're talking about the time, they're writing about the time right then and there, unfiltered. And I think those are the best narratives. When Moody's came out, it was Martin Luther King hadn't even been assassinated yet we have a first-hand account about her experience in Mississippi. Huey P. Newton, Revolutionary Suicide, this is prior to really kind of the explosion of the movement. And this is when he was in prison. He's talking about the prison experience. So I think those are the best narratives. Douglass, right? When he's writing his narrative, it's still in the midst of the slavery period. So again, I think those are the best things to start with, those firsthand accounts, and then you can move on. I mean, Malcolm X's autobiography, there's some problems there, but it's still a good book to read. I think those are good starts. And I also agree with Rashid in terms of films. And when you said it, I wanted to clap and stand up, because this new film that just came out, Judas and the Black Messiah, no, I would say look at the documentary. Documentaries, there's some problems with those too, but I think those are best to explore when you want to really understand history, because it's going to include original footage, original voices, interviews at, again, not too far off from the actual time that these things happened. And so that actually will give you a better sense of what was going on at the time. So I would start with narratives, some fiction, depending on the fiction. Historical fiction, I would say, is better. And I would do documentaries just to start and get my feet wet. Eyes on the Prize is good, although I have some problems with the Gates documentaries. They're still good and have good information. Again, it's all about perspective. What you decide to include or exclude is there, but still it gives you a nice introduction to these things. I would also say that I will say this, if you are a student, a college student, you should take an African American Studies class, period, before you leave the university. But if you're a Black student, you should absolutely make sure you do not leave the university without taking an African American Studies class. You should make it your business to do that. That should be a commitment to yourself. You should absolutely never leave with a college degree, never having taken an African American Studies class. You should all make a pact with one another that that's what you will do, and you take it in groups so you have that support. But you should absolutely do that. Make it a promise to yourself. So I would definitely, and for those who are not in school, community colleges, many of them offer African American Studies courses, take one. Start a community conversation or book club. Do something like that that can help you all learn this material and interact and dialogue with other people who are ultra interested in these particular topics.
I think books is where, where you can get the best information from. Yeah, the film and the film industry. I still need to see the Spike Lee movie. America.
You mean Four Brothers?
No,
it was Four Brothers.
No, it's the one. It just came out. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? I forgot.
The narrative was kind of like the young Black man was killed, and I think the father was holding the police hostage.
Yep.
And it was like a reverse situation.
Yeah. I forgot what it's called. I need to look it up, but I need to watch that, Judith and the Black Messiah. I haven't seen it yet. And then I need to watch The One Night in Miami with Malcolm X, and I think Muhammad Ali is in there as well. But yeah, the film industry is it paints the picture that the majority wants to see. So because they need money, so they need to sell it to a certain group of people. But I do the documentaries, books, trying to think, classes helped a lot. with me learning. And, you know, like you said, a class isn't just enough. You really have to learn outside the classroom and take that time on your own to really understand, you know, a small section of African American history. But we have some questions in the comments.
Can I just add something,
American Skin.
Betty, before you get there?
Go ahead.
Let me just add something. So the panel before us, the young person who was facilitating said something about being picky about what you watch and what you listen to. And I would just echo that. You have to be very selective in terms of what you decide to watch and take in, because it can be very dangerous, especially for young people as they're developing these ideas, to depend on or rely on media for their information. So people should be very careful about not just films, but the music they listen to, and also the social media that they engage in. That can be actually very dangerous, right, for their minds, for their intellect, for their development. So I would just echo that too.
Sure. Yeah, I had to take a break from social media. I took a couple of months, off, because it's like it kind of really started messing with, you know, my goals, and it was a lot of what they call it now is trauma porn, with seeing a lot of, you know, you just keep seeing African Americans being killed, and it's like the first thing you wake up and you look, and then it's like another trending video of justice for, and it's kind of like, you know what I'm saying? It's like it really starts to mess with your mental and like I guess your optimism. So I had to take a break for sure. But the movie is called American Skin. That's what it's called, from Spike Lee. But the first question that we had from the comment was, should reparations be a part of our education to our youth? And I'm going to say, should Black codes be taught in our history and how it has impacted Black people from then to now? That's what I'm getting from the question.
Absolutely. I think both reparations and Black codes are crucial aspects. Black codes, because you can literally trace Black codes to how race has been translated into policies that are being put forth now. And reparations, because reparations is the way it's taught in high school. The way I understood it is that like there was this like minor push for reparations, and then we just kind of let go. But as I've studied further, I've understood that the push for reparations has never really gone anywhere from Black communities, from Black organizations. I think they're both really crucial aspects. So absolutely, that should be a part of the curriculum.
I think that when we talk about reparations, we can also be a bit more specific about what that entails and what that means. A lot of times when we think about the idea of reparations, we like to think about handouts and Black people needing handouts. However, if you understand the history of the welfare system, it was not for Black people. It's still not for Black people. And if it was, it wouldn't still exist. So when we think about reparations, I think we can start thinking about, how can we get more African American students in college? How is that being paid for? With whose money? When we think about it on a local level, when I look at my community now, a lot of the students here, they don't have programs of enlightenment. They don't have, I grew up with all of that. I had after school programs. I was in book clubs and all of that. But once I was out of a Black private school, all of that stuff went away. So I think that a part of reparations, we can break it down, and it shouldn't just be, yes, here's this lump sum of money, do as you wish. And I think that on the outside, it does sound like yes, and I've seen the argument, yes, Black people have done enough, so we should be able to get that and do what we want with it. But I do think if we're trying to push our own people forward, and if we are trying to uplift and empower our people, especially if you are an educator, and especially if you come from academia and you kind of see how the power in that, I think that when we talk about reparations, we can be more specific, and we should be more specific. How can we allocate more resources? And I think it should be resource-based. It is not a handout. And we don't, I hate that mentality so much, because we built this for free. So there's nothing that you can give me. There's no amount of money that you can give me that erases the blood that is on this soil. But if we think about resources and moving those resources around and making sure that they are even, to me, that's where we can start when we think about reparations. And absolutely, Black codes is a fundamental part of our history, because Black codes now translates to even understanding the school to prison pipeline, understanding how so many different systemic things work and operate now. So yeah.
I also wanted to add real quick that I don't think reparations should be framed in just this monetary framework. I think there are some like reformative justice things that can be done too. It's not just like erecting museums. It could be like pushing for history to be taught from the African American perspective. It could be like introducing more perspectives. It could be mandating people to take an African American studies class. Like it could be multiple things. It could honestly, I think a part of reparations is acknowledgement on a national scale.
I don't want to get into a full discussion around reparations. However, I think what's already been said is good. I don't agree with everything that's been said, but I appreciate with the perspectives. But I will say that there is something owed to African Americans in this country, monetarily, culturally, socially, politically, spiritually, and in every other politically and in every different arena that we can think of. So there is something owed, and reparations is repair, is redress. It means there's something owed, and there is something owed to Black people. So how that looks, what that will look like, is yet to be determined. I don't think we even have to have that conversation until there is a concerted effort to actually acknowledge that reparations is required. We have not had that. So there has been no unanimous decision made that says reparations is owed. Once that is said, then we can talk about what that should look like. But there has never been any acknowledgement that anything is owed to African Americans. As a matter of fact, people have said there's nothing owed to African Americans, but we continue to make great contributions culturally and otherwise to this country, to the world, and there is something owed for that, for 400 plus years of free labor as well as cultural labor, but also the physical labor. And I would say that once the acknowledgement that reparations should be paid is done, we can get into a conversation about what that actually looks like. In terms of Black codes, of course, that is important. That is part of the history. Black codes have been around. I mean, we had colonial laws first, and we talk about this in our class, right? Colonial laws. And then you have another set of laws that are applied to free Black people as that population grows, which are, and you also have slave codes. So being able to differentiate between these things and what they look like and how they impact people is very, very important. And of course, how that then are precursors for the Jim Crow laws that we see after the Civil War. So yes, it's important to teach as part of African American history.
I think you all touched on everything with Black codes and reparations. I think the way we envision reparations is different. Me personally, I don't agree with throwing money at an issue. I feel like we should build institutions and communities to undo, the 400 plus years of systematic racism. It's not going to just take, putting money here or here to, eradicate everything that's been done, because it's not really just on a physical aspect or on a socioeconomic aspect. It's a psychological aspect as well. So that takes a little bit more time to undo. But we are at time. It is exactly 11 o'clock. I would like to thank all of my panelists for coming on. It's always a great time having you all on a panel or talking to you all. Very insightful as always. And I will talk to you all later. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
I guess I'm just going to jump on in here. How you doing? I'm Jerry Primm. I am the Civic Engagement Coordinator for the state of Ohio for the NAACP. I come from a national vantage point, and that's the fancy way of saying that I'm in charge of helping to increase Black voter mobilization in the state of Ohio. And so I guess I've been asked to come in and touch on a couple things. I had thought that I didn't realize I was just going to be the only person on the screen at the time. So we're going to go in. We're going to go in as hard as we can anyway. Just wanted to share a couple things with you all from a vantage point of how National looks at the youth units and how I look in the state of Ohio at the youth units, and hopefully I can share with you some encouraging words. I don't have a lot to talk about. Even as a minister, I'm like 15 minutes tops. You get to watch the football game after me, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking. If you have any questions or any comments, I don't know if I have the ability to see things in the chat, and I'll answer anything that I can. So from a national standpoint, the youth units are our future, period. They have a lot of things that they want to do as it relates to getting out and pushing Black people to get out to vote. But I'm 48 years old, and let me just be honest, in canvassing, my knees have taken about as much walking up and down steps as I can possibly take, but the younger knees actually work. And my brain has probably maximized on technology to the degree that I can as a 48-year-old. But I keep a bunch of 20-something-year-olds around me. My entire team just about are 20-something-year-olds. And I keep them around because they have, thank you, team, for letting me know to go to the comment side. But I keep as many young people around as I possibly can because, quite frankly, my brain just doesn't process technology to the same degree that a 18, 19, 25-year-old does. And so we absolutely positively need your input. We need your insight. We need your engagement. We need your civic engagement, period. And praise God for the cooperation of our state president, Senator Tom Roberts, for assisting me in some of my initiatives. Right now we have a COVID situation, but out of my budget, I allotted, I think it was like $5,000 for technology to help our units, our youth unit. And I allotted that money with my thought pattern on the youth units, because my brain is just not going to figure out as quickly as yours what to do with those pads. We have things that we do with them, but I want to know what you do creatively. Your youth president, Jaylssa, will tell you that when I traveled to Cincinnati, that was one of the things that I tasked him with. I said, look, I'm spending this money. We probably won't roll it out until after COVID, but I need you to think about what to do with this so that we can better help and better serve this community. And National was right lockstep with me when I told them that I wanted to spend the money on the technology. They were like, hey, look, do it. Let's make it happen. Let's see what we can do. So I'm just here to let you know that we are keenly aware. Additionally, from a national standpoint, when anything that we can do to be responsive to you, we definitely want to do. From the vantage point, we had some young people in Kent State that were afraid to go vote. Well, I got the National sends me a message. We can't get other people mobilized to get into Kent as quickly as we needed to. So I just hopped in the car and I went down there to make sure those people could actually vote. Period. We're not going to allow any of our people, whether they're members, and praise God if you are a member. I'm getting some feedback from you, Tiff. We're not going to allow you to feel like you're standing out there on your own. So from a vantage point of an organization that in the last year moved $100 million and has hundreds of thousands of people as our youth units, they are so responsive. I mean, when somebody from Kent State sent a message to the National that said, we're scared, National sends a message to me here in Ohio, and I'm in my car and I'm on the road, period, to address them. So you have to know that you have back. At the end of the day, you have back, and you have back because without you, we can't do anything. You know, you are our future. You are the reasons why we fight the fights that we fight. And we empower you to find some new fights to fight. You know, when you say, we have this slogan that you'll hear President Johnson say all the time when you see him on television, when we fight, we win. The bottom line is fight, you know. And that doesn't mean go tear the club up as we used to do when we were young. It means go out there, and when you see hate, fight against it and find creative ways to fight against it, and then leverage us. So I'm going to give you a couple points that I want to input to you. Yes, our civic engagement does go beyond voting. To Sister Cooper, and I'll touch on some of the other things that we're doing beyond voting. But I want to touch on a couple points for our young people that I want you to just think about, right? And I know some of this stuff is going to sound cliche, but it's extremely important from my vantage point. I thought about what I would want somebody to say to me if I were sitting in your position. First and foremost, it took me almost 40 years to figure out that my father was my best friend, period. My father, as a father, his job, and I'm using that, my father and my mother, let me put it in that context. There is nobody on earth that cares more for me and is a bigger advocate for me than my parents. And their job from the time that I was created was to protect me. So you got to pay attention. My dad don't understand any of the technology that I use, hardly, right? And even in the stuff that I do in terms of my work, my father can't really like dig down into it. Like, I own a copier company. He ain't really getting into it. My brother owns a data collection and analysis firm. And my dad can't really get into it. But what my father can absolutely do is show me historical vantage points that I wouldn't know because I just don't have my daddy's experience. So it sound cliche, and I don't care if you're 25, I'm 48. I talk to my dad every day. And my dad calls me sometimes yelling and hollering and cussing, and I get it, right? But some of the reasons why I've been able to do some of the awesome things that the Lord has blessed me to be able to do is because I engage my daddy every single day, you know, especially when I don't want to hear it. So pay attention to what your parents say. I know that sounds cliche. Nobody in their 20s want to hear that. I wouldn't have wanted to hear it, but I'm absolutely telling you that because it's what I needed to hear back then. Two, find the winners. Winning is fun, and I like winning. I'm not even gonna pretend like I don't. I'm about as competitive as you get. If we throwing away toilet paper, I'm trying to be the best at throwing away toilet paper. But I have to find those people in whatever I'm doing that are the winners and are the best, and I gravitate towards them. Because I need to learn from the best, period. I'm not messing around. Like, I'm not hanging out with somebody who's like number 3. I'm looking for who's number 1. If they're number 1, that means they're better than me, means I can learn something from them. And I'm not shy about saying that. So find those winners. Here, this one is worth writing down. When you're given a task to do it to the best of you, not just to the best of your ability. Do it the best that anybody has ever seen. I know sometimes, like when we come out and we might do a civic engagement, we might do a no contact canvas, right? So you have your group of people who are complaining and whining about, oh, y'all waited to the last minute. Oh, we got to do this. Or, oh, I can't believe that we got to do that. Then you have that group of people who just roll with the punches, and they just take it and they say, I'm going to do it and I'm going to be the best. And then you have no idea that the people who matter know exactly what you're going through, and they watched you not complain, and they watch you execute with a degree of excellence. So in scripture, we say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few, so now I can trust you with many. A lot of us just want to skip the being faithful over a few and just jump right into being trusted with many. If I can't trust you to put napkins out when we have a picnic efficiently, would I look like trusting you with anything else? You couldn't even handle putting out napkins and condiments. For me, like I met Jaylssa when I was down there in Cincinnati, and I'm impressed with the young man. So anything that he asked me for, he called me and asked me for, like important elected officials around the state personal cell number, and I run it to him. Because when I was down there, I watched him just working. He wasn't up here jockeying for the camera time. He was out there jockeying for doing whatever his president asked him to do. So when your leaders ask you to do something that seems so small, hold on, where's my finger? All right, so small, do it, and do it excellently, because you have no idea who's paying attention. All right, so you have no idea who is watching you do those small things, and it seems small. It could be as simple as putting hot dog buns out for the picnic when we do an event. I'm paying attention to all of that, and I look forward to engaging you young people who actually do those little things. Let's see, competition is good. Don't be afraid to be competitive, period. It's way more fun being number 1 than it ever will be being number 2. I'll tell you a story. When I was working in corporate America, I worked for Konica Minolta, and historically, I was always like in the top 30 out of like 20-something hundred salespeople. But when I became number 1 on the continent, all right, so being in the top 30 meant I got the tickets to the Progressive Field to our Indians games. And that was cool because that meant we were at the clubhouse. We got to eat all the food we want, eat all the ice cream, do all the stuff that we wanted to. And it was awesome, right? But when I became number 1, because I started being a lot more competitive, I found out we had a suite where they brought me food and anything else that I wanted. And I got to hang out in a whole different kind of luxury. Being competitive is okay. Don't be afraid to be, and don't let anybody tell you don't compete. Please don't. let's see. So competition is good. There's a difference between being scared and being cautious. If you're scared, you probably ain't gonna be able to hang out with me long. It ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna work because I'm not gonna be scared. I'm gonna be cautious, meaning that I'm gonna calculate how to get to a win. But I'm not. We can't be scared. Being a member of the NAACP, you got to look at the history. Go all the way back to the 1920s, 1930s. This is the organization. It's the number one Black brand for a reason. You can't really be scared. That doesn't mean just run into a KKK rally and rah. Nah, you got to be cautious in certain scenarios. There's a difference. And I liken to, and that doesn't mean that sometimes you're asked to do some things that don't make your you get a few little butterflies. I can remember, and I talk about the Cincinnati unit because I engage all the units, but they did some things last year that were just out of this world. I literally bought megaphones so our units can be as loud as we possibly could and get in as much good trouble as we possibly could. Them jokers almost went to jail for being loud and just thanking Black people for coming out to vote. And I told National was like, yes, because they want us to be out there advocating. I like, in my butterflies is like going, if I'm at Cedar Point and I'm getting on one of those roller coasters and I'm going up, I know that I'm up pretty high and I have butterflies because I'm up there, but I know that I'm gonna land safely at the end of the ride. So don't be afraid of those butterflies. And then here's my last point, and then I guess I'll open up for Q&A. Don't be afraid of failure. Failure is good. It is an actual natural part of the process. You can Google Mike Jordan on failure, LeBron James on failure. If they didn't fail, if LeBron James doesn't totally mess up the way that he leaves Cleveland, he doesn't become the darling that he is today, because now he's more mindful. That was awesome failure. I can't tell you how many times that somebody told me no when I was selling something. Then I ended up being number one in sales. And in terms of Black voter mobilization, I took on some of the campaigns that there was absolutely no way in the world, had never been done in the history of the country. There was no way in the world we were supposed to win. But I wasn't afraid of the failure. Because failure gives you opportunity to learn and then correct it and then come back. A lot of people see something like, oh, we can't do that. And they don't even try because they're afraid of the failure. Usually when I see something that I'm supposed to fail at, I'm like, yes, let's go get it. And by God's grace, I don't lose often. I have some failures, but I'm not going to lose too often. I guess this should be the last point. And I know this isn't a religious organization, and I'm cool with, I'm ecumenical. I'm cool with every organization, every religion that you can imagine. I'm a board member for the Anti-Defamation League. I grew up in the Nation of Islam, and I'm saved today. So go figure. But don't forget to spend some time talking to the Lord. Period. I take every single thing that I do, I take it to the Lord before. I take all my plans to the Lord first, period. Sometimes I have the time to write them down, sometimes I don't, but I'm gonna get on my knees and I'm gonna have a conversation with him, and I'm gonna make sure that he blesses them. And if he doesn't, he lets me know. He'll give me a sign, some way to let me know, don't do this or do that. So find out what that means for you. because, but don't be shy about having a conversation with them. Team, do we want to open up for Q&A, or is that the end? All right, so our next speaker is, thank you all. Have a great day.
Good afternoon. Well, good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you. I am Charity Martin King. I currently serve as Director of Social Change at The Ohio State University in the Office of Student Life. I am also a Silver Life member with the NAACP. I serve in the Columbus branch number 3177, to which just a few moments ago, we just completed an executive committee training. I first want to say to everyone who is on, the young people who are on, activists, mobilizers, wherever you find yourself, educators, community givers and doers, the religious community, those of you who have planned this conference and who have worked behind the scenes, I want to say thank you. I thank you because we've seen the needle move in the past year in a lot of ways in significant contributions from young people. At the marches that I participated in over the summer, the legislation and the advocacy, the research, and the things that are happening, it's young people who are at the helm of this movement. The NAACP, all the way from W.E.B. Du Bois and the Niagara movement and the historical approach of the NAACP wouldn't be where it is without SNCC. It wouldn't be where it is without the lunch counter sit-ins and the legislation that happened. And young people were in the heart of that movement. And you are in the heart of that movement today. And I thank you for that. Here in Ohio, where you join me, we have seen here in Columbus the passage of a civilian review board, which was groundbreaking legislation. We've also seen changes across this nation in the use of chokeholds and looking at police impropriety. The conversation around the position of the NAACP, the Black Lives Matter movement, in addition to Trans Lives Matter, and the conversation around what civil rights really means and the 14th Amendment has become quite regular in our discussions. And young people, I say thank you. There are some things that I'm going to give you for your keynote address. But the first thing, again, is thank you for the rubber bullets, the wooden pellets, for the tear gas and the pepper spray, for arguing with your parents, for being on this today when you could be anywhere else. You've chosen to be here with us and to be here with me. I say thank you. There are some things I'm going to give you for your keynote. And I must mention social change. Social change is about moving and shifting a paradigm. It's about philanthropy. It is about community service. It is about education and access to education. It's about addressing the social determinants of health. Where do you find yourself on that wheel of social change? Please constantly have some introspection about where you fall with social change. There are just a few principles for your keynote that I want to give you today. The first is for Tamir. I want you to be transformative for Tamir. To be transformative as a transformative leader for Tamir, be transformative. Transformative leaders often are disruptors. They push against the social norms. They dare to challenge society for its any continuity or oppression. Be transformative. Be courageous. Have the ability to constantly push against what society is saying. And as a transformative leader, be educated. You should be well read. Are you paying attention to the writings of Cornel West, Nikki Giovanni, Angela Davis being a transformative leader? I want you to be transformative for Tamir. Be transformative for Tamir. The second thing, I want you to be justified for Julius. Be justified for Julius. Seek justice. But when you seek justice, may it be justifiable justice, researched and understood, because as long as you know what you are standing for, you must stand. And sometimes you may find yourself the only person standing in that room. Be justified for Julius. be justified for Julius. And as we pursue that justification, please understand that there should absolutely be no peace until things in our community is justified. So I want you to be transformative for Tamir, justified for Julius. And in being justified for Julius and pursuing justice, research, know the law, and require your legislation and those who are sitting in positions of political power and influence, require them to be accountable as you pursue justice. But without the education around that justice, we cannot be, therefore, justified. So I want you to be transformative for Tamir and justified for Julius. Know the law. The NAACP has always had a tradition and understanding of knowing the law. Know the law and be justified and pursue justice for Julius. Then I want you to be humane for Henry. Humane for Henry Green. I had a discussion with Henry Green's mom on a few occasions and her constant pursuit of justice for her son, who was killed by a Columbus police officer. Have some sense of humanity for Henry in all that you do, whether you are advocating on the front lines or whether you're looking at minority contracts or the hiring of minority or marginalized communities in your place of business or buying Black. Show some humanity and be humane for Henry. Show some humanity and humanness for Henry. Approach it with a strong sense of faith and spirituality and determination and be humane for Henry. Always it's okay to bring your heart to the table. This is difficult work when we are pursuing humanity and requiring other people to be humane toward our causes. Show humanity and be humane for Henry. I've talked to a lot of activists and mobilizers who are dealing with depression and anxiety. There are community personnel who are on standby. Do not suffer by yourselves. This community is one where the work is challenging and the work can also take a toll on your mind, your body, and your spirit. So when you're showing that humanity and being humane, be also humane and forgiving to yourself. Take a moment for self-care when you're being humane for Henry Green. Show some humanity for Henry Green. Be transformative for Tamir. Justified for Julius. Humanity and humane for Henry Green. I also want to ask you to take it a little bit for Tyree King. Take it a little bit for Tyree. Sometimes when you're sitting in the room, you just can't take it anymore. And sometimes we're just going to have to take it. Those who are activists and mobilizers, and when you're doing this tough and challenging work, sometimes you're going to have to take it on the chin, take it in the chest, take it in the email for Tyree. But just as much as we take it, you have to be willing to give it. Don't just give it and not be willing to take it. Also, taking it is having a mentor. Surround yourself with influential mentors, people who really care about your well-being, and then ask them to take it for Tyree. Young people, you are challenging all the generational gaps and bridging the gaps of generations with these various movements. Though there are a lot of pockets of organizations, sometimes we have to take it for Tyree. And in taking it for Tyree, if you can give it, you got to be able to take it. Make sure that you're open to the mentorship. Make sure that you're open to being challenged by your leaders and being challenged by those who have served in our community for years. The mantle of leadership is difficult, and we need all the experience of the young, the middle-aged, and those we might say are old. We need them at the table. So I want you to take it for Tyree. Take it for Tyree. Be transformative for Tamir. Justified for Julius. Humane for Henry Green. And take it a little bit for Tyree. And last, I want to talk about yourself. Where are you? What is your adjective for the letter Y? What are you going to do for you? The race is not given to the swift, nor to the strong, but to he who endures until the end. Regardless of what you believe, what are you going to do for you? What does that mean for you? Where do you fit in all of this? Where do you see yourself? Oftentimes when I talk to collegiates, young people, and even many adults, they just don't know what tomorrow brings. We are in the midst of a global pandemic still. Our community is disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Our community is less likely to receive the vaccination. Where do you fit in the course of education and advocacy, transformative leadership, being disruptors and influencers, being able to push the needle on social media as well as in person and in legislation? What are you going to do? Where do you see yourself? Many times we're sitting back, and God has given us some things that he will require us to do. Happening right now, which is on my multiple devices, is the Columbus Urban League's celebration of Black history. Just finished listening to Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who is chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, in her words of encouragement that she's giving to those who have signed on to the Urban League program. Where do you find yourself? Inspiration and perspiration, and then they meet in the middle somewhere is you. Where will you find yourself? Young people, be transformative, be humane, be honest, and first of all, be you. Find yourself somewhere on this spectrum of social justice and social change. I want to give you a scripture. It is Proverbs 21:15, which has become one of my favorites. I took a minute and thought about, what does the Bible say? What does the Word of God say? And regardless of what you believe, there is something that you can find in your value and belief system. And for me, I turned to the Word of God. And I looked at Proverbs 21:15. And it reads, when justice is done, it is joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. Even in that, even in the Word of God, justice is good for the righteous, but terror for those who do evil. There's a belief and value system in justice. There is a space for us everywhere. In our churches, there are activists and mobilizers and revolutionaries. And Jesus himself was a revolutionary, or they would not have crucified him. He was an activist and a mobilizer, and they didn't even like the car or the transportation that he rode in on. However you present as yourself, whether you are presenting as a trans individual, whether you are presenting as someone who is a mobilizer, a student, however you present, find something that you could hold on to that causes you to take yourself to another level. I want you to go to another level. Oftentimes we hear things that tell us to turn the other cheek, to be docile, but we also hear things about being steadfast and immovable and always abounding. Young people of the NAACP, as you are building chapters across the state of Ohio, and every person that was slain that I mentioned today, this is happening in the state of Ohio. I thank some friends of mine who directed me to mappingpoliceviolence.org, because we are in some strange times. But in this country, it has always been a little bit strange because we are not quite home. So as we continue to make room and create space, I want to remind you to take it to another level. Go to another level. And however you present and however you are involved in this movement, just do something. We lost the Honorable John Lewis, had the pleasure of having some conversations with him a few times over the years, get into a little trouble, good trouble and necessary trouble. And young people, again, I say thank you and God bless you. Be encouraged. We are in this together. I'm down here again, like I said, in Columbus, Ohio. Our president here with the Columbus NAACP is Nana Watson, and I am also with the Ohio State University Office of Social Change. God bless you, young people. May he keep you. Stay safe, mask up, and take care of yourselves and your families. I love you, and we are in this together. And thank you to the NAACP for having me on for this keynote this morning. God bless you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. John Tyus. I'm the founder of the ID movement. The ID movement is a mentoring program that focuses on men that have grown up without fathers and have been positive inspired and mobilized towards the work that we're doing all together collectively. So that's why system engagement is so important, you know. It's about all of us coming together and all of us have the ability not just to live, but to pour back to the lives of others that's coming up next, especially the generation. One way to live longer is to invest not in security, not invest in stock markets, but to invest in people. And I think that's what we have to do, is invest in people, generations that are coming up to do stuff, that's coming up next, because those are the ones that will have their voice, that will have their voice to live longer. I think it's really crucial that we focus on particularly as young people, mentoring them. We say that 85% of young men that have behaviors, they come from fatherless homes. Usually, even 90% people that are runaway or poverty, they come from fatherless homes. So, and I have some economic issues as well. So the high school, so what high school is to make sure we give our young men holistic experiences. That our own house with them, our insights, our experiences, we have been hoping that they make a different choice for their own lives. I come to figure out that I've worked out a making sure relationship. Somebody that will just not just from their head, but from their heart. I truly believe that I can inspire somebody, but having inspired them. And sometimes what we do is from our mind, we will intimidate them. I see not only just that is the heart is, so that the heart and mind of our young people. When come in and what is mentoring? In the case of men, mentoring is men, it is the other young men core of their lives. And the core of where their lives are here, where they plan on going. Somebody can have a proven track record of success. How do I do this? According to you. How do I really walk this walk? How do I live this life? It's important that we set life and give them our track record so they can really come from home, feeling like successes, feeling like business. I think that's very important. This is why, as a board member, so excited to be a part of the NAACP, and we're all serving on that to believe in this. This is what we have to do. This is together. It's not about just what we build for ourselves, what we build for others. We have to believe that this is well called about voicing of yourself and letting confidence is going to be a powerful way. What this book is a compilation of mentoring books that really pours into the hearts and minds of young men all across the city of Ohio. We have people from Sean Grant of Harvard, Jaylssa, Kevin Boyd, other comments like that. It's going to be a great experience. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our section of this panel discussion. Today, we will be talking about the power of the Black vote. We have three special panelists here to help us discuss the Black vote and all things voting related. So once they join, we'll introduce them and we'll get started. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'd like to start by thanking you all for joining us and sharing some of your Saturday evening with us. So if you all wouldn't mind introducing yourself, we can start with Raphael, then Councilmember Shayla, and Councilmember Charles.
Great, thank you for having me. I'm Raphael Davis. I am a PhD student in political science at The Ohio State University, primarily doing my research in political reconciliation, transitional justice, sort of like reparations, and then also African politics.
Can you all hear me? Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shayla Favor. I serve as a member of Columbus City Council. Prior to council, I served as an assistant city attorney with the Columbus City Attorney's Office. I am a graduate of The Ohio State University, received my bachelor's in political science and African studies, and my law degree from Capital University. Happy to be here.
All righty. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charles Newman, and let me correct, I am not a council member. I had the honor of working for a council member, the great Councilmember Shayla Favor, in a previous role. So I was the one working with Columbus City Council. But currently, I am the Community Relations Coordinator for the City of Columbus Department of Public Service. And I also serve as the senior pastor of the Antioch Baptist Church located on West Campus of The Ohio State University. So I am a graduate of Ohio Christian University. And that's about me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you again for participating in our panel discussion. We are happy to have you. We'll go ahead and get started with the panel discussion. First up, I would like to talk to you all about what the Voting Act, right, means to you and what it means to Black people everywhere. Anyone, feel free to start.
Well, I'll go ahead and kick us off. There's an important case that the young folks should definitely look up. It's noted at Shelby Counter versus Holder. It's a 2013 case. It was a landmark case that brought a decision by the US Supreme Court, which essentially rolled back to key provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that gave federal authorities oversight of districts based on their histories of voter discrimination, suppression, which long prevented such regulations. So what the Voting Rights Act means to me is that we are correcting that grave mistake that was made a few years ago. I don't want to overstep because I think we might get to voter suppression lately, but that is one way that you counteract some of the suppression that we see around the country. We want to be able to ensure that no one feels disenfranchised, that no one feels suppressed, that no one feels that their voice doesn't matter. And you can't do that if there is not oversight. If you leave it up to the states, as we saw just a few months ago, it will be pure chaos. And to me, it means that we are moving in a direction where every single voice and every single vote matters.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll go follow up with Councilmember Favor. I think she provided the great legal background and that foundation. I think the importance of the act is that we recognize that it is the foundation. And so here we are today, many years later, and a new generation of voters are now arising, we find, with the last election, the excitement that was around them, actually last two elections, and the importance of, one, the Black vote. But I think in order to appreciate where you are currently, you must have a firm knowledge of where you came from. And so I encourage all, younger people, actually all Black folks and everyone, to be, take time to look at that right, to look at that voter act and see all that took place and what it really means. I think sometimes we just look at it as a document or, a piece of legislation that was signed, but it was a lot into it to kind of pave the way. And I think when you understand that, you appreciate the value of what it means when, people get on and this generation to say, like, when your grandma's telling you to make sure you go and vote, why she's really pushing you to get that vote and all the effort that was put in before, what we get to sometimes take for granted today in that opportunity.
To kind of echo a little bit what council member Favor said, I think it kind of means two things. The first thing is that that act was another step toward a greater level of democratization, right? Because without the voices of the people, you don't have democracy, and it has just so been the case that our voice has been left out over the course of so many hundreds of years. So I think a greater level of democratization, but then I also think that it kind of reflects shifting norms in society, right? That law might not have been passed if there weren't shifting norms already going on in the United States that was saying, hey, it's about time. We need to, we're pushing for equality, right? And so I think that also speaks to the level of activism and the level of protests and the level of pushing on legislators that Black activists and organizers have been doing.
Well, thank you for that. I really like that, pushing for change and pushing for new activism, because that is something that we have experienced with this past election, and we are still working towards change that is so desperately needed. So thank you. Next, can we all discuss what voter suppression looked like then compared to now, and how it is still affecting people of the Black community of all ages and everywhere?
So voter suppression literally is as old as the country. As we think about when the founding fathers were drafting the United States Constitution, one of the gravest mistakes was to not embed in the Constitution the right for every citizen to have the right to vote. And that was essentially based on the goal of ensuring that Black people would not be able to vote. And so I think you have to take that historical context into place to understand that this literally, when people say this isn't anything new, it really is not anything new. That even way back then, they were devising ways to ensure that Black people did not have the right to vote. So back then there were poll taxes, there are literacy taxes, there was violence directed towards once Black people did get the right to vote, or they were attempting to vote despite not being able to. Quite frankly, we're seeing those same exact things right now. They look a little bit differently when you think about poll taxes. People were paying in some way to have to be able to vote. Voting was a right that was for wealthy white men. And so poll taxes today look like felons who are currently, they're disenfranchised because although they have the right to vote, the states, and this is what's happening in Florida right now, won't allow those felons to be able to vote. They were unable to vote this past election because their fines and fees had not been satisfied from their previous convictions. The same thing is still existing today when you think that. And then, the question remains, because it's not a right that is embedded in the US Constitution, well, then it shifts intentionally to the states to decide what they want to do. And so they can get as wild as they want to. And so some require voters to obtain identification, proof of citizenship, Others purge inactive names from the rolls. Ohio was a part of that drama. People are shortening early voting periods, limited access to absentee and mail-in voting. If you start to pay attention right now, because of the historic turnout of this election, state legislatures are doing everything that they can in order to prepare for the 2022 primary. Georgia, essentially saved the country, if you will. They're already taking action to ensure that you don't get that type of turnout, if you will. There's going to be strategic fights around mail-in voting. So there, voter suppression, nothing new. It's changed a little bit over the years, but the intent is still the same.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. I'll pick up on this. So we have always talked about the physical act of voter suppression. So all of those things that Councilmember Faber talked about with, the merging of the list and things like that, but I think in our culture, what we're seeing now is something new. Also added to the physical is this mental act of suppression. And honestly, it happens more within, it is an internal suppression that we are causing on our people. And so what I mean by that is that we have been led to believe now that even though we do vote, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter. I think in this last election, one of my biggest concerns were that, people that look like me were suppressing other people by saying, don't vote. It doesn't matter if you do vote. I'm saying, look at where we are. And, the other side has sides have been able to play, that, you've always voted for this type of candidate or that type of candidate and it's gotten you nowhere. So don't vote at all. And I think it's important that we look at that as another side of mental suppression. Suppression is, when you try to suppress something from happening in any way. And the Black vote is under attack right now. It's under attack in the physical forms, but now mentally. And I believe that, I like this talk with younger folks because we have to rejuvenate in some way this idea that it is still important that your vote still. I remember growing up, my parents used to say this, and I don't know if it's factual, and I'm sure you all probably heard this, that, when Hitler won, he won by one vote. So you better go out and vote. It matters. But we were raised on those kind of statements that if it's that one vote that matters. And I think now there's a suppressive language and an ideal going around that, you don't have to vote. And so when we see these off years and we don't see a Barack Obama or a champion, fighting for us, we don't vote. And we see this in this next election. We have an important election this year that I hope everyone realizes that is just important as the presidential election. And so I think when we look at suppression, it is growing. We have beat some of those obstacles, but as you can see, they're just bringing them back. And every time we show our power, there are folks out there looking to suppress us, oppress us, and then eventually make us depressed.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I want to go back to these voter purges for a second. They've been huge. I think back in 2016, for example, Arkansas purged thousands of voters for so-called felony convictions, even though some of those voters had never been convicted of a felony at all, right? And I think 2013 we saw where Virginia purged about 39,000 voters based on data that was later found to have an error rate of up to 17%, right? So yes, right, voter purges, like they're a typical thing. You do want to make sure you have accurate, up-to-date voter rosters. But what we're seeing is some of these normal things that should be happening anyway, right, being used against the Black community to keep them from coming out to vote. But I also want to point to a more silent voter suppression thing that I don't think gets brought up a lot. But if you look at transportation and the way that cities kind of, do their redlining, right, or there's bus systems and they travel through certain streets and they're just far enough from the polls for you to not want to walk there at nighttime or in the cold, or maybe they restrict when the polls can be open. And so, most people working 9 to 5. Well, we're going to make sure that these polls close at 5, right? So all these different kinds of ways, and when you have an infrastructure set up of transportation that was meant to keep Black people not only and the poor not only economically subjugated but politically subjugated, and that kind of plays a role in voter suppression as well.
But if I may, I wanted to wrap back around to what Pastor Newman said, because if you paid attention to this last election, you really can't say that your vote doesn't matter if you're a Black person. You can no longer say that. You're looking at states that were not even considered to be in play truly by Biden's team. I think that, the amazing work of Stacey Abrams, which has been ongoing for a little over 10 years, where she has built a statewide infrastructure to empower disenfranchised, not just Black people, but out in those more rural counties, to be able to go and vote, right? Providing transportation and things like that. So much so that voters that she signed up, they were, I think, about 24,000 of those were purged by the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, who was now the governor of the state of Georgia. And so, Pennsylvania, Michigan, all of these states where, very much dense areas where Black and brown people live, turned out. And there's no way that those states would have turned blue if we didn't show up and vote. And so now we have to be able to connect. And that's on people who are in the State House, who are in Washington, D.C., who are at City Hall. They have to be able to connect what your vote means to a regular person every single day. And that, I think, is what's missing. When you think about why people say, I don't have the time to do it or whatever, we have to do a better job of explaining what all of this means beyond the politics, beyond the chaos of the message, beyond the circus that was just a few months ago. If your vote didn't matter, January 6th, the insurrection, the riot would not have happened.
Yes, thank you. I love Stacey Abrams, and I just want to point out the power of Black women who, if you look at the numbers, Black women showed up astronomically this past election. So we definitely need to give Black women our flowers. But we do want to talk about how starting voting oppression affects Black and brown communities disproportionately. So things like voting purges, how it is mostly Black people and brown people, how felonies came into play and all those sorts of things. So if you guys want to elaborate that a little bit more so we're on the same page.
Yeah, I would connect that to, modern day poll taxes. Unfortunately, we make up, although we are 16% of the US population, we make up an astronomical amount of those who are incarcerated. And so some states have prohibitions on felons being able to vote, but that's not the case in the state of Ohio. And like I said, in the state of Florida, where felons were provided the right to be able to vote, they were still prohibited from voting because obviously they don't have the money to be able to pay whatever costs are associated with their past experiences. And so that's a problem. You see people like Bloomberg, who was running for president, gave an astronomical amount of money to attempt to cure a lot of those fines and fees. And it just wasn't big enough to turn Florida the other way. I think about the purges. The thing is that no one is going to continuously check to see if everything is okay with their voting, right? Like if their address is correct, if you register to vote, you should be registered to vote for life. And so the thing around if you don't vote in every single election, you could be purged. And that was the case here in Ohio with inactivity. And, for various reasons, some people don't vote in primaries, some people don't vote in general elections, whatever the case may be. But that should not impede your right to be able to vote. I think, quite frankly, polling locations are a problem. Mr. Davis indicated transportation, but thinking about, honestly, the time that it takes for individuals to be able to go to vote. Why aren't we making it more convenient for people to be able to vote? So if you're on your way to work, make your polling location closer to where you work. So maybe you can go on your lunch hour and to be able to vote versus at your home, closer to your home, because you could be rushing back and forth. And so, making voting more convenient for folks is the way to go.
Yeah, I think, the great line that was just discovered, in Cousin's favor, and I think we all know that is the ability to get to polls. And we know the ability to get to polls, the ease of access to polls, transportation. We know Black and brown people, that is the hardest thing about voting day, is actually finding the time and the access to getting to the polls. And so when you look at the connection to your purging a list based on inactivity, you're going to see larger numbers in those communities by far, and so when you look at those lists, you're talking about, the single mother who has to get on one bus line to drop her child out to daycare to hop back on to get to her job. You're talking about, that Black or brown man who wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get to work and then don't get off to work till maybe 8 or 9 at night, and I share with, as a pastor, Secretary of State did this whole tour about this purging as if these were undiscovered ideas. And it was like, the truth. You know it's hard for us to get to the polls. And while we're not voting, those things are there. The identity of, people who wanted to vote, and this new idea that we went through this year of making it cool to let people off from work to go and vote, and jobs being proactive for you to take the day off to go to vote and close it down. That happened this year. That was all of a response of, and I'm going to be blunt, the white awakening that went over this summer of, wait, Black people are being oppressed in America. Let's help them out. But how many years prior to this did, that lady that works at, or that man that worked at my local McDonald's, who was serving me breakfast on my way to me voting, and knowing that they got to work 16-hour days, 12-hour days, and I'm not going to get into how much we pay people. That's a whole other conversation. But we know we work, the average person's working 12-hour days. So when do you go vote? And so we shared those things with the Secretary of State as pastors and saying, hey, that's why people aren't voting. And you're saying that because they missed the last election or last 3 elections, you're going to take them off this list. And now you're in a time where we want to make it easy. We want to access, we want to do mail-in ballots and all of these things that now became convenient. We can't participate in because you purged everybody. And I think that, it's a direct connection. Now we have a system where the ease of voting was changed so much this election that I think Councilmember Favor said it. Not only do we as Black folks need to realize that our vote did matter, but all of the excuses of why you aren't voting have really been taken away. So we've got early voting, we've got mail-in ballot, however you got to vote. Now we got to fight the issue of, are you on the list? And if that list is continue to be updated, because of past year's practices that weren't given the conveniences that we had this year and, the last year, then of course it's going to affect us tremendously. And those are the things that we've got to call out, that you can't purge. Now, 5 to 7 years from now, 8 years from now, you want to do a purge based on all of these convenient ways of voting that were put in, because we didn't want to go to the polls and the pandemic hit and COVID. These are things that should have been in place for Black and brown people years ago, not just for the sense of a pandemic. We appreciate it, but 8 years ago, we were in a pandemic, and that was Black folks couldn't get to the polls to vote because there was no bus route. Or if there was a bus route, who can catch a bus to make it to the polls? And, in a Black neighborhood, you got one polling location for a per capita person, where, in the suburbs, there's 7 different polling places for 2,000 people. Lines are in and out. But if you go to a Linden, you go to a Near East, everybody goes to a one person and use the excuse, well, we didn't have any other location to put the vote in place. So, it definitely is a direct connection.
And I'll just add to that, you think about voter ID laws, right? And I think we're seeing a surge of states saying, oh, well, we're going to start doing voter IDs. And I think the big thing, and I'm going to go back to what Newman was just talking about. He said he wasn't going to get on how much we pay people because it's a whole other issue, right? But if we think about this, if I'm struggling to put food on the table or struggling to pay my bills, or I got 3 kids and they need all this stuff for school and I'm trying to pay for internet, and then all of a sudden I also have to pay for voter ID, and you need 5,000 documents to get a voter ID. There's a cost benefit analysis that gets run in the back of the head, like immediately. They're like, oh, well, I don't have money for that. I'm trying to make sure that's if it costs $10, $20, whatever. Yeah, I got 3 kids. That's food that could be on my table for my kids, right? And so I think that kind of system, of course, is going to disproportionately affect people in a lower socioeconomic status. And who do we find there most often? It tends to be us.
Thank you all for all your comments on that question. Yes, but something did come up in the chat. Claudia Mason says, how did Ohio go from voting for Obama twice to voting for 45 twice? What happened?
People woke up. People woke up. I mean, the state of Ohio, gerrymandering is a huge problem in the state of Ohio. I think that there were a lot of people that, Black people and white people alike, that were naturally drawn to President Obama. He was safe. I'm trying to watch my words. He was safe. He was highly educated, not intimidating in any way. And so in those terms, people felt comfortable. But what you saw after, I don't think the country would truly believe that it would happen. Quite frankly, I didn't believe that it would happen. And so, it caught everybody by surprise. And what does that mean? After President Obama is elected, state legislatures all over the country, those that are Republican dominated, started stepping up their voter suppressive laws and made it easier for more folks to be disenfranchised. And I say all that to say, though, I don't think that Ohio is forever red, that we have to take the time to work this state, to empower the Black and brown communities in our largest cities. Columbus is the 14th largest city in the country, believe it or not. And so there's no way that we can't turn out Black and brown votes in Columbus in greater numbers that we can. Yeah, Columbus was blue this go around, and so was Cleveland, and so was I can't remember if Cincinnati was. I think Cincinnati ended up being purplish or something along those lines. But what I'm saying is that we have huge communities, cities that have these populations that can hold a candle to exactly what was done in Georgia. But that takes money, that takes time, that takes patience, somebody who can work the state statewide. Now, to the young individual who asked this question, you also should ask yourself why a Black person who has never held a statewide elected position. Yes, we do have Black Supreme Court in the state of Ohio, but her name is Melanie Stewart. And I don't want to misspeak, but I think there's a good assumption that based upon her name, some people didn't know who they were voting for. You know, it sounded like a safer bet. But thinking about that, we have an open Senate seat, and there are no Black people that are in play. And that's a problem. So we have to start right now in Democratic, with the Democratic Party in every city and in the statewide Democratic Party coming up with a plan to empower voters all across the state of Ohio if we're going to turn blue again. But without changing our gerrymandering, it's gonna be difficult.
Councilmember, can you explain gerrymandering for those who may not understand what it is?
It's just the drawing of the districts in the state of Ohio. So it looks really wonky. If you look at the state of Ohio, you will see where certain communities are, like you'll draw around certain areas, you know, like a New Albany to something that's just, I can't even think of the other area that's right close to New Albany. But the drawings don't make sense. And ultimately, that is also another way to suppress representation in the state house. And representation in the state house is key to bringing about the types of changes that Black and brown people need in our dense cities like Cleveland and Cincinnati. And so when you talk about, this is off the topic of voters registration, but since you asked the question, when you talk about funding our schools, right? You're not going to be able to get to where you need when you have a super majority of Republicans in the state house. Quite frankly, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of the biggest call for civil rights reform, what was the General Assembly doing? They were passing Stand Your Rights. You know, that's what they were doing. They were passing COVID relief bills. They weren't making sure that Ohio schools were getting funded in such a way that they can operate during this pandemic. They were focusing on that. They were focusing on issues around abortion. Right now, they're working on making, I believe, June 14th, which is, I think, Trump's birthday or something right along. It's very close to Juneteenth, making it Trump Day. That's what they're working on. And so it is incredibly important that we work strategically to counteract gerrymandering in the state of Ohio, but back to voting and empowering our cities, the Black folks in our cities, to vote. And we don't need every county to go blue. Every county in Georgia didn't go blue, but we do need our heavily populated cities to go blue, and that can counteract what's happening in our rural communities.
Yeah. And I'll say this is another perspective. It is interesting. The greatest accomplishment about Obama was, and I think attribute was that when I went to my family reunion, there was my cousin, I'm not going to say his name because he may be watching, who I knew never ever thought about voting ever in his life, was excited to vote for Obama. And to me, that was an attribute because Obama was able to, grab from those people on Wall Street down to Main Street. People say, well, what happened when Trump came? The greatest accomplishment of President Trump was that when certain folks that don't look like me went to their family reunion, the same cousin that was equivalent to my cousin that never voted got some hope to vote. And so those people came up from under a rock, and guess what? We found out in America that there actually was more white folks that did not vote than there was Black folks that didn't vote. And those white folks just were of a different culture, from a different, we've seen them. And I'm not going to say white folks to label them, but we know that that's what happened. There was another culture that Trump found that Obama did in his run. And that culture was very, I don't know if it was found, but they came out. And yeah, it was already there. We didn't see them. They didn't vote either, but they voted. And they voted on, this I don't know what they voted on. I can't speak to what agenda, but he discovered a new patch of people. I, I don't know what we want to call them. Racism? Okay, we can just call it racism. Yeah, the America that Black folks saw all the time now had a leader. Let's be honest. And so what we have to do now is we've got to make sure that we recognize that this battle, who we're fighting, is going to take all of us. Because when you look at January 6th, and what happened in the Capitol, every Black person, every person in America should have came back and said, well, wait a minute. If they agree and think the same way that you think, then help me understand. And so in the church, that was a different look, because, I called every white pastor that I knew that told me I was wrong to vote on these moral things. And I said, well, help me out now, because y'all done took over the whole Capitol. Because that's what they do for us. If I voted for Obama, it was because, Charles, how could you? How can you sit at the table? And I think there is a word that I'm teaching my church, I'm teaching Black folks, that we've got to learn. It's called tolerance. That word is probably going to be the most important word that we learn, because when we challenge those that don't look like us, the word tolerance, like, what are you willing to tolerate? And so when we vote, it wasn't, people said that, well, how did we lose the 2 elections? We found out what people were willing to tolerate, and they saw it. And we see that currently now. You don't have to be a part of a party when you, like Councilman said, you got people not voting for how we're going to make housing and schools better, but they're trying to make Trump Day. We have a U.S. Congress, a group of U.S. congressmen and women who several days before, this were their words, spoke against this person, but later said, well, I don't think we can do anything about it. And so this election, when people throw out moral voting and things like that, this is the time when I really think we're going to see what moral voting is. And it has nothing to do with the legal issues on the ballot. It has to do about the common decency as what we truly want to paint the picture of being American is. Because right now, the word patriotism shows you bust up in the Capitol building and do it. So nobody can say, they're not patriots if they believe in Black Lives Matters and they speak about that, because the truth of the matter is, patriotism is that I'm going to speak up about what's right and what's wrong, not try to dictate what somebody should do in their own personal life. Now, coming from a pastor, folks are probably going to try to hang me on the cross, but let's keep it real. We have a duty now to vote based on how is this going to make this better for all people and everyone. And nothing that we saw on January 6th does that. And some may say, what did we see the last 8 years? And I think that's what we got to vote. If we're going to go back to getting a candidate, and I'm not even going to say become at this point, it's past, are we going to become a democratic state again? Are we going to become a state that can at least vote somebody with some good morals and some sense? Because that's what we failed on over the last 8 years. He just didn't have good sense. And anybody who can say he had it, I'll talk to you any day and say, what good sense did he have?
I think we got 2 things here, right? One, the word socialism got thrown around a lot, which is the intermediary between, as most people see it, between democracy and communism, right? And so you had lots of people that were like, oh, no, not socialism, right? And I think that's part of what got a lot of people out to vote. But I think one thing I can say for both former presidents, Trump and Obama, is that both of them were really good at the same thing, and that was mobilizing emotion among the voter population. Obama gave us some hope. And there's this book by political scientist Davin Phoenix. It's called The Anger Gap: How Emotion Shapes Our Politics. And so I encourage everyone watching to take a look at it. I think it explains kind of what Councilmember Favor, Pastor Newman have been saying here. It was that Trump tapped into a range of voters that we hadn't really seen come out before, right? And that was because what mobilizes that particular group, according to this, this book, is anger, right? And then we see studies that show, based on public opinion polls, that for Black people, going to the polls is not about being angry is not necessarily the first response, right? We will go to the street and march. We will go to the street and protest. But we don't get so angry over a political figure, right? We're not as prone to that. What moves us more is hope, is having that leader that makes you see you can accomplish, you can do, you are powerful, and kind of validates a positive sense of self-image for us. And so I think really part of what can explain why we see Ohio voting for Obama twice and then Trump twice was that we had two different people that were really, really good at mobilizing people based on emotion.
Yeah. So let's talk about getting to know your candidates. Oftentimes we see people vote strictly one party rather than who is morally the best candidate. My favorite fact is that you don't need a high school diploma to be a congressperson. So we are electing these people who just simply aren't qualified. They just have the funds to be in that position. So can you all discuss ways to educate voters on getting to know their candidates?
I would say, so, as a community person, I encourage people, when every election you're going to see, they have candidate forums, they have all of these things. And I'll tell somebody, there's one place that nobody's going to ever tell you not to go to the candidate, and that's to their fundraisers. Go to their fundraisers. Pop up at their fundraisers, look who's around there, ask your questions, don't be disobedient, but learn. But, we live in a time where now there's, all of this research. Every candidate, most candidates are going to have a website, look at their agenda, hear what they're talking about, stay up to date. There is a great service, and I think it's open to everyone, called Hannah News. Google it, I don't know the exact, but it literally sends out daily all of the information that the State House is passing. So look at what your local office is doing. Working in a local council member's office, we enjoyed. We held, I would say, over a year, 40 plus community hours where council members were just going to community and listen, advocate. There's public hearings, definitely local. And I tell people a lot of times people focus on the federal and the state. Hey, local government is what affects your life every single day. Go to a state. All of these are public meetings. Go to a state house. Well, it's COVID now, so but you can watch them on Facebook. And look at what people are voting on when they're in their current position. Because at a time when they're running for election, they're going to have an agenda. And they're going to speak about things that they want to see happening. And so don't vote blind. Be bold enough to ask the question and to make sure that what you need as an individual, it can get on their agenda. And if it can't get on their agenda, don't be afraid to ask and say, why not? And I think we have this mentality, and I'm going to say we, because before I worked for an elected official, there's this perspective that they're untouchable in the sense of you can't reach them, you can't talk to them. Since working with, they are busy, but they're staffers who work for them who spend their entire day providing information, getting answers, emails, and things like that. And so when you have serious questions, ask about them, ask candidates, and field those questions so you can make that decision on who I'm going to vote for. Get involved. When you go to these forums, and Councilmember Favor can attest, maybe one forum that's in our neighborhood, you see us. But when this election cycle begins, it is an every week and every day. All of these groups are having forums, and guess what? We don't see our people there asking questions when they can. But what do we do see after the election is like, well, why you didn't, you're not thinking about us. Well, was it you had a chance to tell what you wanted on the agenda. And so I encourage people to be proactive, become everyone is a community leader when it comes to speaking up for what we need in our community.
So as a former candidate, I think it's incredibly important to understand that some of this, in order to be a fully informed voter, you're going to have to do some work on your own, because every flyer, every news article, it's filtered through somebody else's opinions of what issues matters, and what is deemed important, through a certain lens. And that doesn't necessarily equate to what's happening in your community, right? It doesn't necessarily equate to you as the young Black mother who is struggling to take care of your kids and 4 or 5 jobs, right? And so, and I know that is a daunting task to some degree. And so what has happened since COVID is that you've seen a lot of political action groups come together, a lot, which I'm very happy about, ones that are focused on Black women, some that are focused on Black candidates. There are niche groups all over the place. Take some time to find some trusted sources that you could rely on to help you filter some of those things. I think during the year that I was running, I can't even imagine, I can't tell you how many forums I participated in. And Pastor Newman is right. If it wasn't held in our community, I wouldn't see us there. And so I know that it's hard to be able to get to some of those things, but also the beauty of COVID is now we are doing things virtually. And so you're seeing, you can access those past recordings on YouTube or platforms like the one that we have here. I think the way that we have learned to re-engage as a result of the pandemic, I think that's going to continue on because you're providing individuals who weren't able to make it to meetings at 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock, the ability to tap in when they can. And so, those things are incredibly important to folks who want to be informed and who don't want to just rely on a card from a particular party when they go and show up to vote. There's some legwork that has to be done before you actually show up at the polls. And I'm sorry, one more thing. If your candidate is not using social media, that should be a red flag as well, because that's another way that you can engage in this year, in the generation that we are right now, to let people know who you are, what issues you stand for, what things you don't like. People tell on themselves a lot through social media. And so if you really want to get a good sense of what that candidate is like, what they believe in, check Twitter, check Instagram. We're already on there, and they should be on there as well.
Yes, Councilmember Favor, thank you. I was actually going to build off of something you said. Okay, so the stigma around a split ballot, communities at different levels. So we have large, small. What can the average person do within their smaller community? Because like-minded people travel in pods, right? So if one is openly expressing their opposition to that fact, and how Jaylssa said that people will comfortably just continue voting with their party, regardless of the facts behind each candidate, I guess you could say. What can the individual do at a smaller level to kind of combat that?
So like voting themselves in local elections?
I'm sorry, I cut out a little bit.
I'm sorry, you were asking what they can do to be able to vote in local elections or to just educate themselves?
To educate themselves, yeah.
Yeah, so, I think that if you go to the Franklin County Board of Elections, you can find the ballot in its entirety, and it lists every single candidate that is running for city council, state auditor, judicial seats, and everything, right? You don't have to wait in order to get one of those flyers in the mail, which you generally don't typically receive until about 30 days before the election, which might be a little bit too late. And so you could print that document off that is provided by the Board of Elections, and then just start doing some of the due diligence on your own time when it's convenient for you. And then you individually just make that decision how you intend to, if you want to say, split your vote. Now, obviously, you can only select, depending on the type of race, for one candidate. But that doesn't mean, like also, so I'll give you a good example of this. In city council races, there were 4 seats that were part of our elections. There were 4 for one party and 4 that were more in a, just represented a different position. And you could select myself, you could select someone from them, you could select another person that was on the same side where I was at. It didn't matter like how you registered. You could just select which one based upon your level of comfort and who you felt drawn to. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, yeah. I was kind of hoping more for, and anybody can answer this. I was just building off of what Councilmember Favor said. How do individuals combat stigma in their own smaller communities? Yeah, sorry if it was a lot of questions.
I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about in the conversation around voter suppression is voter intimidation. And that is real. There are ways to intimidate individuals to make them feel like they need to be able to vote. And sometimes that is an internal conversation that is held within our select communities. At the end of the day, when you go into a booth, it's only you in the booth. And you need to realize that you don't have to broadcast, document every single stage of your life if you don't elect to do so. And so for those who are not yet comfortable saying that I believe in a progressive type of way, or I feel in a more conservative type of way, well, then that's okay. You don't have to broadcast that to everybody. And perhaps that's something that you just keep those values to yourself. But when you go into the booth, it's just you there. And you have to just have confidence in that. You've made a decision that fits with your moral ethics and makes you comfortable at night.
Yeah, and I think the other way you fight that stigma, it is not necessarily having conversations in your groups on who to vote for, but I think it's a time now. The shift is, how do you educate your friends and those and families the process to develop their platform for what to vote for? Meaning, what tools and research? How do you know? First of all, teaching folks understand what this position is, and so a lot of times it's important to understand the scope of a juvenile judicial candidate and a candidate for common pleas, because those are 2 different people and 2 different judges. And I think in our community, the stigmas, and when you talk about balance, is that judges are all the same. And it's not. What does the city attorney really do? What does a council member do in the life of that position? So when you're voting and when you're researching, you can look at that person's background, character. I think is it Jaylssa? I don't want to say it. Did I mess up? Yeah, she said we're just voting people because they got money, but may not have the education. And so it's kind of like, hey, if you're going to be this person, then I need you to have a background. And I'm gonna throw this out there. There's another app that I think will help. It's called Promise Made, Promise Kept. It is a new app that was developed. It's on your phone, PMPK. It is great because in this app, you can download it on your phone. And you put in your zip code, it literally will pull all of the candidates in your area. It will give you access to their websites. It will list you their committees and where they are. So for instance, a lot of times in politics, you see in the campaigns, someone has held an office before. So you don't come off the street and run for a U.S. senator and never served anywhere else. And so that gives you that background, that app to say, hey, when this person was on council, what did they do? And if they were, they broke it up into committees, and if they dealt with education or housing, and now they have an agenda and they're speaking about, I want affordable housing, I want these things, you can talk, you can see what makes them valuable for that. And I'm not putting, this out there because, I tell people, when I worked with Shayla, the one thing you knew you were going to get was when it came to housing, when it came to, that thing, which was one of our scopes that she dealt with as the housing chair, she had a background in it. It wasn't just coming off the street. She had a legal background. Our team had a background in how do we do things. And so those are the important things that is not about the person you vote, but what qualities do they bring? And if we teach people in our small circles, it goes back to that word I say, moral voting. And that moral voting is not what I think people take it is are you able to look at this candidate that you voted for and have a good makeup in your mind based on their character traits, based on their qualities, based on their education or what they've been shown to do to check that box? Because, that's not a party decision. That's not a party line decision. This person is going to represent me on making some big decisions. Are they going to understand what they're talking about? Because you can't be in the affordable housing chair and not know. You can't talk about, utilities and not know, anything about the fracking and things like that. These are all topics that you can't learn this stuff. But you can learn it, but you don't make decisions on these. You got to know that these people can do it. And so I hope that kind of helps you, that stigma is, those are the kind of conversations that I believe that people on this panel and are watching need to start happening in our communication. In our groups, not to vote this way because, we don't, it's like, hey, let's look at this candidate. They've been in this office for the last 7 years and this is what they were accomplished. Could you imagine if they were on the federal level where their budget tripled? And the money that they were able to do, because now they're not working with CMHA, but they're working with HUD. Now they're not working with, Department of Utilities, but they're working with the National Agriculture. Like, you got to play these things and say, hey, and I'm a believer, and I'm not going to go too deep in bad, but there's the lesson of the talents, and everybody's getting talents, and they wanted to know, what did you do with what you have? The person that did something with a small budget most likely is going to do great things with a big budget. It's the people that, when they down here that we don't see nothing, and then they want to move up and they want to run on this. Well, if I can get here, I can do more. Nah, show me what you can do with this, and then as my vote will get you here.
Okay, well, guys, we thank you so much for participating in our panel discussion. We really appreciate and value your time. We appreciate the words that you all shared with us. I hope our audience took away some lessons and some new information, how to inform yourself, how to stay vigilant, how to register, and all other things that we discussed. So we want to thank the youth chapter of Ohio NAACP for allowing us this time to talk. And anything else you all may need, you can follow us at NAACP_OSU and reach out to us through there. But thank you for this time.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Everyone have a blessed day and continue to be educated because there's never too much that you can know.
Hi, my name is Claudia Mason. I'm the advisor for the Ohio NAACP Youth Council. I am so full right now and so proud of the leaders of our division. I want to thank Jaylssa, our president, but I especially want to thank all the Black girl magic that just happened. We just had several panel discussions led by Kayelin, Miss Ohio for America 2020. Betty Miller led a panel discussion. She's the president of Ohio University NAACP, and Jaylssa and Taya from Ohio State University. I am so proud of all three of you. I'm grateful that all I had to do was tell you, hey, this is what we need to do. And you guys ran with it and you made it happen. And I'm grateful for you and the organization that went into the panel discussions that you led. I'm thankful to all the panel members as well. We had representation from all over the state, and whether it was where the panelists were located or where the those leading the panel were located. So I'm grateful for that. I want to thank Jerry Primm and Charity Martin King for their guest speaking roles, and also Dr. Tyus. I at this time want to talk about, if you are at all interested in leading a in establishing a youth chapter, whether it's a youth council or a college chapter, please get with me. My email is at Ohio NAACP Youth Council. I'm sorry, Ohio NAACP.yc@gmail.com. We have social media presence. All you have to do is just search for it. It should pop up in Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. So we try to keep that up to date. And that's all I had. Well, let me say a little bit more. I was introduced to this through establishing a high school chapter. I'm a teacher, and we just happened to be teaching at Thurgood Marshall High School. And I thought it wise, because we're out of Dayton, Ohio, to establish a NAACP chapter at Thurgood Marshall, given the history of Thurgood Marshall, of course. With the help of Dr. Derek Ford, the adult president of the Dayton unit NAACP, we did that. And right now that chapter still exists, and it's doing great work. We're very proud of the fact that we have increased our number of youth councils over the years. We just reactivated 3 youth councils or college chapters: Ohio University, Toledo, and Columbus. Very happy that's happening. And we're working with some other colleges and youth councils and high school chapters, and we hope to have even more. Our goal is to have 10. But if you're listening to this and in your city or wherever you are, if you need or would like to establish a NAACP Youth Council or a college chapter, whether it's reactivation or charter, please get with me. I would love to assist you. These councils and chapters are an outstanding opportunity to give the youth in your area an opportunity to lead discussions like this, or to just lead any sort of activism that needs to happen in your community. Many of our youth, they're inspired by certain things, and this participation in the youth council or college chapter gives them an opportunity to do that. To be honest with you, it's also a great college resume booster. Lots of young folks don't realize there comes times when they need to fill applications out, and they will ask you about what you've done beyond school. So if you're a part of a chapter like this or a council, it looks great on your record. It's just a great opportunity to give back to your community. Okay. So that's all I have. Again, ohnnaacp.yc@gmail.com. Please send me an email. And again, I want to thank everybody that participated in this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia. I just wanted to thank everybody on joining us today on our 2021 Youth Summit. Thank you to all the panelists and to everybody that joined us today. Again, I look forward to continuing this work with everyone and ensure that our civil rights and our democracy stays intact. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone who made this Youth Summit an incredible success, but I would be remiss if we did not thank Lieutenant Colonel Claudia Mason for all of her efforts and everything she did to make this a reality. You know, this is the first Youth and College Division Summit that the state of Ohio has done. And what an amazing job our young people did with such exciting leadership from all of our various different units. Additionally, I want to thank Sherry Hamilton from Event Pro Management, who made this as seamless as possible. So on behalf of those individuals who work behind the scenes, thank you so very much. And of course, to all of our unit presidents and all of the heads of our youth chapters. Thank you, thank you, thank you.